to keep your decorum in the chambers. Don't say anything defamatory towards anyone.
Mike, can you put your mic up?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, ma'am. So no defamatory comments. If an item is on the agenda, please wait until we discuss that item, and then you'll have time for public participation after that. So with that being said, let's go with the public participation. Anyone, please. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Paulette Hatfield in the F section, and I just want to thank the council so much for the speed humps. The traffic has lessened. There's not so many people going through the cut-through on Florida Park Drive, and the speed is more controlled, although I think we need another speed hump around Fleetwood because people are traveling very fast on that section. But I do thank you so much for all your efforts on our behalf to try to keep us safe. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir. Please state your name for the record when you come up to the mic, too, please. Yes, sir.
I'm Mike Cochiola. I live in Palm Coast and the W's. I wanted to talk about utility costs and other costs in the city. Right now, we
Sir,
have...
we're getting ready to discuss, that's an
I
item
want to make a general statement.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is that we are now in the position of having to catch up. We always have to catch up because we keep developing and developing and developing. So by catching up, what we mean is we're going to have to somehow find the money to catch up because impact fees and all that don't quite do it. So in catching up, we're the ones who are going to have to pay, the people who live here now. And as long as development keeps going, development that we didn't ask for and probably didn't want, and yet we are going to have to pay to catch up to all development that's already occurred and development that's likely to occur in the future. It's chasing something we cannot catch, but all we can do is throw money at it. As development continues to expand, we pay more and more and more. And so that's a real problem. You really need to think about that, because what we'll talk about later on in this meeting, it's going to keep happening, just like sand washing away from the ocean. They got to keep chasing it and chasing it and chasing it, and it's not going to work. You can't stop the ocean, and if you don't control development, you can't stop increases in costs for the 1/3 of this city and this county, actually, but the city, who are on probably fixed incomes. Every time it's $30 here or $50 there goes something that somebody can't buy because they're on a fixed income. Really need to think about that dynamic between development and always trying to catch up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, somebody make a decision. Yes, ma'am. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, I'm Anna Gibson. I live in the P section. I actually wanted to offer you some thoughts today on the Palm Coast Aquatic Center. To be honest, I don't know if this facility is losing money or not, but there seems to be some inconsistencies in price, and I just wanted to make some suggestions to you regarding the price and the available passes for the community. So the first thing is, this is from the Aquatic Center. So children under 2 are free. I'd like to make a suggestion to actually raise that to maybe 4, because a small child is maybe only going to be in there 10-15 minutes before they start shivering and get cold. So I would like you to consider maybe upping that age to be free at a later age. The second thing is that youth 2 to 17 are $3 and seniors are $3. So they're the same price, but adults are $4. But there's no monthly pass for a child, and so that's another inconsistency. I don't understand why a child would be charged as an individual price of $25 and not be discounted to the same rate as a senior. Seniors are paying the same rate as children for $3 for daily admission, but for whatever reason, children are exempt from a discount, I guess I would say, for a monthly pass. The next thing I'd like to propose is potentially a family pass monthly. So the only family pass you actually offer is a summer family pass. I'll be honest, I never went to the aquatic center until I had a kid, and now it's her entertainment. I've taken her to private pools with my friends, but she loves seeing the public. She loves talking to all the people at the aquatic center. And for her, it's her entertainment. And I think you would potentially increase the amount of people going to the pool if you would just offer a family pass. Because right now, for me to go with her, which she's 2, we wouldn't go separately, I'd have to pay $50. She's the only reason I'm there. So that's a little bit wonky to me that there's just not a family option. And then there's a quarterly pass, but you're not mentioning seniors. You're not, again, you don't have a family pass for quarterly. So I think paying some attention to the prices would be good. Additionally, I wanted to make a suggestion regarding services. I think it might be nice to have a concession stand. You could even potentially rent it out to a local business owner to run. Something simple that offers hot dogs or chips might be nice. You could offer birthday party packages as well for families who want to bring a bunch of friends to the pool. I think that would increase the traffic at the pool. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Mark Webb, W section. I'd like to point out 2 areas of concern, confusion with the public participation. You've now put a imaginary limit of 30 minutes, which is only 10 people in a 30-minute cycle, if you had a room full. In the last meeting, at the beginning of the public participation, you actually had no more than 5 people sit down by your request, Mayor, to end their participation. So I know that time is critical, your time's important, our time's important, but this is an open forum, an open event for the citizens to come in and speak. I've been coming to these things for a long time. Mayor, I've sat with you for several cycles. Very rarely do we exceed 30 minutes. So that's just a thought. The second thing I'm confused about is the statute says that the public participation will be held at the beginning and the end of this meeting. But yet, at the end of the public forum at the end, it then comes back to the dais and you guys spend 15, 20 minutes talking about various things that the city may have a thought or a comment. And I would suggest that maybe you guys, and I know the sunshine law or whatever, excuse me, that prior to the end of before you open it up for the public, that you do your internal sharings of projects or thoughts or concessions or things you want to do so that those can be potentially addressed by the public before the close of the meeting. My interpretation, when it says at the end of the meeting, it's the end of the meeting. So those are just 2 points for you to ponder and think about. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else for public comment to matters not on the agenda? Seeing no one come forward, I'll bring it back to the dais. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Hatfield, for the thought on the traffic calming. We appreciate your comments, and we appreciate all of our residents' comments. I wanted to let everyone know that we have an open survey on our website, so we would love all of our residents' feedback on those different and various devices that are located around our community, so that we can bring that feedback back to the City Council for their discussion. Thank you, Ms. Gibson, on your thoughts on the Palm Coast Aquatic Center rates. We will also look at that in a cost-benefit analysis. Thank you, Mr. Webb, for your comments. And Mayor, City Council, that's all I had.
Vice Mayor? Mr. Miller? Councilman Miller? Council? City Clerk? Okay, we'll move on. I'm sorry, let's talk about this real quick. This is a workshop, so I know we have 30 minutes on there, but we're going to be fairly lenient on that. I would suspect. Do I have consensus on that? Because this may be a bit of the discussion on this coming up.
Mayor, what is your comments in regard to the open?
Well, no, that's just the opening. That 30 minutes is at the opening and close. When we're talking about agenda items, you have as much time to speak. And Mr. Webb, usually at the end of meetings, I know with this council, we have addressed the person's concern because it's very few people that are here at the end of meetings. So we pretty much are talking to who's remaining in the room about that specific, you know.
About new business.
Okay, all right. But items on the agenda, it's unlimited.
Correct.
Okay, so we're good to go. I hope that helps you, Mr. Webb. Okay, so we're going to move on to item E, presentations. Council?
Yes, we have a presentation gap analysis recommendation for utility rate increases and adjustments.
Mayor, City Council, as Mr. Cody, Director of Stormwater and Engineering, and Mr. Murray Hamilton, our consultant with Raftellus, is getting started, just wanted to echo how the plan being presented before you today has a couple of different effects that might not be seen to the public. One, this supports business expansion by providing reliable water and wastewater services. It helps attract new business and industries. It also reduces the future maintenance costs by upgrading aging pipes and facilities. It lowers those long-term repair expenses. It also reduces pollution by looking at modern and advanced wastewater treatment facilities. It reduces the contaminants discharged in our natural water bodies. And then finally, it also generates revenue, expanding service areas so that our utility department can service those new connections to new business and residents. So just wanted to kickstart us with that process. Carl?
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Carl Cody, Director of Stormwater Engineering. I have with me here tonight Murray Hamilton. He's with Raftellus, our rate consultant, that is going to be presenting the second part of the presentation today. Water and wastewater treatment is an essential part of our community, ensuring that water discharged into the environment or used for drinking water meets regulatory standards and poses no harm to the public health or the environment. However, water and wastewater treatment can be a significant financial investment requiring careful budgeting and financial planning. Today, we will go through the utility department revenue sources consisting of rates, fees, and charges, and then there will be a presentation from Murray Hamilton presenting the findings and recommendation from a utility rate gap analysis. So it's important to begin going over the utility department's mission, vision, and values. Their mission is to provide essential, high-quality water services, meeting community needs while protecting public health and the environment. The vision is committed to providing safe, reliable water and wastewater services, continuously improving the operations and protecting water resources while preparing for the future. The values are safety, stewardship, quality, education, and customer care. The presentation today will begin with an overview of the utility, and then we will discuss their three revenue sources consisting of capacity fees, charges for services, and then utility rates. So the Palm Coast Utility Corporation was established in 1970 by the ITT Community Development Corporation, referred to as ICDC. The utility was to provide water and sewer services to the newly planned community developed in Flagler County. Wells, a storage tank, chlorination systems, and pipelines were constructed to begin supply water to new homes, and a wastewater collection system with a 300,000 gallon per day wastewater treatment facility was also constructed. In 1999, Florida Water Services, Inc. purchased the utility from ITT Corporation, and in 2003, the City of Palm Coast purchased the utility. To accommodate growth and to comply with the regulatory changes, there have been expansions and upgrades to the water and wastewater facilities. as well as new water and wastewater facilities as depicted on the graphic shown on the slide.
Hey, Carl, pause for just a second, because this is going to come back up later. In 1999, the Florida Water Services, Inc., how much did they purchase the water treatment facilities at the time?
I do not have that number. I'm not sure if someone else here has that.
Mayor, are you talking about when the city acquired?
No, I got that when we acquired it in '03. I'm talking about in 1990. Well, in 1999, the Florida Water Services, a large multi-system owner operated through the state of Florida, purchased the utility from ITT. How much did they pay for it from ITT?
We'll have to try and track down that information for you, Mayor. Pete, who's a long-standing utility employee, does not recall off the top of his head, but we'll try and track that down for you.
Okay, because that's going to be we'll get to it later. Go ahead, Carl, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. So the key takeaway from this slide is new facilities and expansions to existing facilities are necessary to meet the needs of current and future growth, as well as upgrades and enhancements to existing facilities due to aging of facilities and to comply with regulatory requirements, as well as supporting economic growth. The utility service areas include areas outside of the city limits. The boundary for water is in blue and sewer is in green, with the city limits shown shaded in gray. The establishment of the utility service area began with the ITT development area, with additions such as the hammock to provide future service. Other areas were negotiated through agreements, such as the settlement agreement with Fauquier County and others. Rates are 25% higher for customers outside of the city limits. The city does provide bulk service, shown in orange, to some areas such as Marine Land, Beverly Beach, and FGUA, shown on the maps in orange. The city issued over 52,000 bills in December, with city residents accounting for almost 93% of the usage. So the key takeaway from this slide is the utility is obligated to provide utility services to customers within the service boundary, including some outside of the city limits, as well as customers outside of the boundary area per existing agreements. The utility department currently has 2 wastewater treatment facilities. Wastewater Treatment Plant 1 was originally constructed in 1973 that has a current permitted capacity of 6.83 million gallons per day. In 2024, the average annual daily treatment, ADT, was 6.581 MGD, very near capacity. Wastewater Treatment Plant 1 is in the design phase of an upgrade from 6.83 million gallons to 10.3 MGD, which will also rehabilitate the original plant and convert it to advanced waste treatment due to the upcoming FDEP mandate. Wastewater Treatment Plant number 2 was constructed in 2018 with a permitted capacity of 2 MGD. In 2024, the ADT was 1.404. This facility is currently under construction with a capacity construction upgrade at Plant 2, which will double the capacity to 4 MGD. This construction is nearing completion, with the facility being able to accept additional flows in the coming months. Palm Coast Water Treatment Facilities currently can utilize 3 different methods of discharge as a means of beneficial reuse of reclaimed water or effluent disposal. The first and preferred method is public access reuse of reclaimed water for irrigation of residential lawns and commercial properties, because it gives residents and businesses a low-cost alternative to potable water while limiting groundwater withdrawals. The second method is the use of state-permitted restricted access effluent disposal sites, which include rapid infiltration basins, RIBs, and spray fields. The restricted access effluent disposal sites help to recharge the groundwater levels surrounding them when the discharged effluent percolates into the soil, which is a beneficial reuse of plant effluent. The last type of discharge used is the limited wet weather discharge. The purpose of the limited wet weather discharge is to provide a means of effluent disposal during times of excessive wet weather, when the public access reuse sites have less of a demand for reclaimed water and the restricted access sites have reached their capacity. Currently, the Palm Coast Wastewater Treatment Plant operates 2 spray irrigation fields that total 60 acres. The spray irrigation fields are also considered a beneficial reuse since they recharge the groundwater as well. In addition, there are 3 rapid infiltration basins totaling 37.5 acres. The ribs are constructed on deep layers of sandy soil, which allows a rapid infiltration of the treated effluent into the groundwater. The key takeaway from this slide: wastewater treatment plant 1 is old and needs to be rehabilitated and converted to AWT to meet upcoming regulatory compliance requirements, and this plant needs to be expanded to provide additional capacity. The utility has 3 water treatment facilities. Water treatment plant 1 was constructed in 1979 and has a permitted capacity of 6 MGD. Plant 2 was constructed in 1992 and has a permitted capacity of 7.584 MGD, and 3 was constructed in 2008 and has a capacity of 3 MGD. When discussing water treatment capacity, it's a 2-pronged approach. The first prong is the St. Johns River Water Management District that issues the city a consumptive use permit that establishes how much water we can pull out of the ground from various sources, and the second prong is the treatment capacity of the facility regulated by FDEP. As you can see on the SJRWMD chart, we are nearing the limits of the permitted daily allocation. Per the DEP chart, you can see that the Plant 3 is nearing capacity. DEP not only looks at the average daily allotment, but that the maximum combined daily flows, which are not to exceed 75% of the total permitted capacity, is not exceeded. The city did exceed that limit last year. The key takeaway from this slide: expansion of well field and facilities is currently needed. Some of the primary utility infrastructure is shown on this slide, consisting of 67 production wells, 6 water storage tanks, over 830 miles of water main, 700 miles of sewer main, and 75 miles of reclaimed main piping. There are over 56,000 meters, 177 lift and pump stations, 17,491 PEP tanks, over 4,000 fire hydrants, and a reclaimed storage and pump station at Cigar Lake. The key takeaway from this slide: the utility infrastructure is extensive, that requires ongoing maintenance, repair and replacement in order to provide safe, reliable, and quality water and treatment of wastewater. As you can see on this slide, there are 8 divisions within the utility consisting of wastewater treatment operations, wastewater field operations, utility development, customer service, administration, environmental compliance, water distribution, and water treatment operations. The utility department has always prided itself on having a well-run and maintained facilities and a highly trained staff to deliver great service and high-quality water. That level of excellence has been rewarded again and again with about 90 regional, state, and national awards over the past 40 years. Most visible nationally, the Utility Water Boys team has won the American Water Works Association Tops Ops National Championship 7 times since 2006, as well as the state champions 13 times. As you can see, there's currently 166 full-time employees, and it's a 24/7 operation. The key takeaway from this slide: providing utility services requires a wide variety of staff that are highly qualified and are dedicated to providing the best utility service to its customers. Next, we're going to talk about the number of residential dwelling unit certificate of occupancies issued since the city's inception in 2000. These numbers are preliminary and the data has not been audited. However, due to the fact that from 2000 to 2004, the building permits were managed by a private provider and the information is not currently available. The estimated total number of COs for residential dwelling units since 2000 is about 32,500. With the ITT platted lots accounting for 80% of those residential COs that were issued over the past 25 years. The key takeaway from this slide: over the past 25 years, the majority of the development has been new homes being constructed on infill lots, the original ITT platted lots. So there are several factors to consider that are specific to our utility system that have an effect on the cost of operations. The first item is an ITT planned community consisting of 45,000 residential lots. The initial infrastructure was not and could not be constructed to serve build-out. The system would not function if it was. Regulatory changes has required and will require upgrades and modifications to the treatment facilities. The treatment of available water to meet regulatory requirements and level of service expectations is costly because of the complexity of the treatment process required due to the source water quality here in Palm Coast. A large portion of the infrastructure was installed in a short period of time, thus requiring replacement and rehab to occur over a short period of time. The PEP system, which consists of a build-out 21,766, currently almost 17,500 have been installed, is the second largest for a community in Florida, with Charlotte County having the most with around 30,000 tanks. PEP tanks are not commonly used as they require ongoing maintenance and costly replacement, 24/7 service calls, and are problematic as they provide opportunity for inflow and infiltration into our wastewater system. The key takeaway from this slide, each utility system is unique, and Palm Coast has several factors that contribute to additional costs to operate the utility. The utility has a budget that is known as an enterprise fund. In simple terms, an enterprise fund is a self-sustaining government account for business-type activities, providing goods and services to external parties. Some key points to review are that its nature of operations is to offer goods and services to citizens, the customer base serves the general public, the revenue collection is obtained by user fees, and is intended to be self-supporting, not intended to be subsidized by tax revenues, the general fund. Bond and loans can be obtained by pledging revenue from fees and charges. It is not meant to produce a profit as it retains any surplus for future operations. This slide shows the FY24 actual revenues collected from rates, shown in light and dark green, which make up a majority of the revenue. Impact fees are shown in light and dark yellow, which are restricted and can only be used to add capacity to the utility system. And lastly, charges for services, which is shown in brown, which is a very small portion of the budget. Key takeaway from this slide, the utility is an enterprise fund and not supported at all by the general fund. And revenues are comprised impact fees and charges for services and rates.
Quick question, Carl. Go
Yes.
back to that slide for just a second. How much revenue is escaping us by people skipping town, moving out, not paying their utility? Do you have a figure on that, about how much revenue is lost?
I do not have a figure.
Okay. I was just wondering. Thank you.
I know there is a process when bills don't get paid over a certain period of time, then their water gets shut off. So it's not like they run for 6 months or a year. I think it's a very short period of time before the water is turned off.
I'm talking about like people, just say a renter, for example. Say I'm renting a house from Ms. Pontieri, and I decided to leave town, and I could have ran up that bill, you know, and just skipped town. That's what I was just asking, something in that situation. Because I'm sure there's escaped revenue somewhere.
Mayor, we'll look into the collections process for you, procedure that we have on what thresholds, and then we'll get that data.
Okay, thank you.
So you got a utility summary. So there are 4 major expense items associated with the utility system: operation and maintenance expenses, planned capital improvements, outstanding debt and contributions to reserves. The utility system is a critical element for Palm Coast that requires funding necessary to revitalize our existing infrastructure, providing safe drinking water and a wastewater system that will not harm residents or the environment, and to provide infrastructure for economic growth to attract industrial and commercial development that will provide employment opportunities. The utility department has taken all necessary steps to minimize the financial impact to Palm Coast residents. Some actions taken include completing a strategic action plan that included items such as optimizing operations planning for future regulatory needs into upkeep of existing infrastructure, sought out and continue to obtain state appropriation and grants, reviewed fees and charges that resulted in an increase in impact fees paid by new development, as well as recovering costs those are assessed to the real utility charges. The upcoming slides will provide an overview of the three main sources of revenue, the purpose and restrictions of those funds, and status of revenue sufficiency, actions taken, and proposed changes necessary to operate the utility system, as well as the infrastructure needs. So we're going to begin by first discussing the first revenue category, impact fees, referred to as contribution in aid of construction. So impact fees are to recover specific costs and to ensure that growth pays for a share of the capital investments to increase capacity. There is a water CIAC and wastewater CIAC fee. These are typically updated every 3 to 5 years based on changes in costs, usage profiles, development patterns, industry practices, legal precedent, and technology. State statute governs impact fees with some recent changes that must be followed. The next available CIAC fee increase will be able to occur May 1st of 2028. Key takeaway from this slide, impact fees need to be reviewed and updated in compliance with state statute to ensure growth pays for a share of the capital investment to increase capacity. On February 12th of 2022, City Council approved a piggyback contract and a work order with Stantec for a utility rate study that reviewed rates, impact fees, and charges for services. Various options were presented to Council to implement the required rate, impact fee, and charges for services. However, at the time, only impact fees were increased with an implementation date of May 1st, 2024. The results of the impact fee update resulted in a 35.71% increase to water CIAC fees, which had to be done over a 4-year period to comply with state statute. And wastewater CIAC fees were increased 24.98% over a 2-year period to comply with state statutes. Then result will be a total impact of $12,221 at the end of the 4-year implementation period. The next revenue source we discuss is charges for services. So charges for services are costs charged to provide specific services in violations such as turn off and off of services, fire flow tests, backflow preventer annual inspection, water taps, and meter installation, among others. So maintaining cost recovery is critical for sustainable operations. However, many miscellaneous fees have remained unchanged and unreviewed for over 15 years. The existing fees are no longer aligned with the increase in costs of materials and labor, leading to financial deficits for the utility when factoring in accumulated expenses in materials and workforce operations. This slide shows a sample of some of the fees and existing changes in the new proposed charges. Utility staff also reviewed the listing of current charges along with our rate consultant to determine if there were any items that would require a new fee to be created. One item that was looked at was regarding sewer connections. PEP tank installation and connection to sewer force main has historically been funded and a part of the impact fee budget. Upon review, it has been determined that some expenses, tapping fee and connection, as well as administrative costs for PEP tank installations should be charged to cover the city costs in the amount of $841.49. For gravity sewer connections, the builder is responsible to make this connection, therefore no charges would be assessed for permits with gravity connections. So when properties are developed, it requires a utility agreement with the city to provide utility service. Part of this agreement includes fees to cover city expenses, including but not limited to administrative and inspection services associated with the new utilities. Basically, fees to recoup costs associated with new development. A modification is proposed to simplify the process so that the developer can determine these fees early on in their process. The new system will utilize a cost for each equivalent residential unit, ERU. There's a minimum charge to cover projects that have minimal ERUs, such as a bank or other type of facility like that. So the proposed change would have a charge of $75 for ERU for water and as well as sewer, and the minimum charge would be $3,500. This was established based on analyzing 3 years of historical data of projects that have come to the city and the city's cost to inspect and oversee those projects and take on those utilities once complete.
Carl, I just had a question. What was the previous methodology of charging?
It shows there on the upper chart what it would be after the project was designed. We would go in and quantify all the components of the new utility system, and then there would be assessed a fee based on how many linear feet of sewer pipe or how many pump stations they may have, and there was also a base fee built in there, and it came up with a value.
So after the fact, we determined the cost and then billed them that?
Well, it would be at the very end of the process, so they wouldn't even know what this cost was until the process was complete. So there will be a resolution, actually it's going to be in the ordinance, for City Council to implement the proposed charges for services and associated fees. The recommendation is to have these fees become effective April 1st, 2025. Now include an annual consumer price index adjustment of up to 3% if the city manager or designee determines that an increase in fees is necessary based on the cost increase to the city for materials, equipment, and services. Fees shall be reviewed periodically, but not less than every 5 years to determine if any changes are necessary. The slide shows a listing of fees associated with water that have proposed changes as well as new proposed fees. You'll see on the screen today there's 3 in red. Those are items that we have recently done some quality control checking on the backup material and made adjustments from what was in your agenda packet. So these are corrected numbers. This slide shows a listing of fees associated with wastewater, reclaimed water, and industrial wastewater pretreatment that have proposed changes as well as new proposed fees. So there's one number on this one that changed as well. So the bulk of these, or the higher cost ones, the water tap, meter installation, those are all fees that are put on when they apply for a building permit. So it would be, the builder, contractor, developer would pay those costs. There's other costs in here that the consumer would pay, whether it's a turn on, turn off fee, those types of things. So the last revenue source we're going to discuss today are utility rates. So utility rates are used to maintain services and to ensure there are revenues to satisfy and support the operation, maintenance, regulatory, and compliance requirements, and to provide upgrades to the utility. These are typically reviewed every 3 to 5 years when impact fees are reviewed. Rates fund infrastructure costs that include items such as the construction, maintenance, and repair of treatment facilities, pipelines, pumping stations, and the building and site components. It's important to note that some of these elements can be substantial expenses, requiring thoughtful long-term planning. Rates also cover day-to-day costs such as labor, energy, chemicals, and equipment maintenance. These costs can fluctuate based on changes in the demand, flow, or loading. Energy and chemicals will vary as the flow or loading to the system changes. Inflationary costs and supply and demand for items as well. Rates also cover regulatory and compliance costs that entails testing, monitoring, and reporting to ensure treated water or wastewater adheres to environmental and regulatory standards. It's also vital to anticipate future changes in the treatment process, such as PFA and PFAS, seek alternative water supplies, and future shifts in waste streams. Another item is replacement and rehabilitation, R&R of infrastructure, and upgrades of equipment, typically on longer-term cycles. It is critical to place or rehabilitate our vital assets by evaluating the physical condition and functionality of its remaining service life. The rates were reviewed as part of the Stantec study that was completed last year. The proposed rate increase was not adopted. On October 15th of 2024, City Council approved proceeding with a utility gap analysis to determine the current rate revenue shortfall. This is important because it helps identify and address deficiencies in a utility system's capacity, financial performance, and infrastructure. It provides a clear understanding of current capabilities versus future needs, enabling informed decision-making and strategic planning. Key reasons for conducting a utility gap analysis include identifying capital needs, ensuring service reliability, supporting economic development, and updating fees for services, and budgeting and resource allocation.
Carl, just another question. What was the recommendation last year for the rate increase? Do you know that?
There were numerous scenarios. There was a tier system, there was a phase-in system, there's a few different systems. I don't remember the total impact, but it was less than it was this year.
I can tell you too, it started lower and then it got higher. So I think the initial, if I remember correctly, the initial was a little bit lower, but then at the end of it, we were raising like $10 and $12 at certain points.
And I know there's kind of an analysis, a gap analysis of funding and when we kind of hit that red line. And so that's why it was tiered in that way, to make sure that we, at that point, had enough funding.
Also, if, for our low water consumption users, if people consumed low amounts of water, they actually had the chance of their water bill going down. So it was structured to where if you were a conserver of water, then you could go down, which means your larger users, including larger businesses, their increase would have been higher than I think what is probably proposed in this.
That was first presented on 11/14/2023.
Correct. And then it was again in February, and then lastly in March.
And March was the final read and the rate increase for impact fees. Got it.
And we'll get, in the next few slides, we'll get into specifically why we did the gap analysis and what the needs were, or what changed from the last rate study. So, utility rate gap analysis, why? It was necessary to review and update the Stantec rate study to account for the following: reduced revenue, unfunded needs, staffing needs, project cost increases, operating cost increases, and consent order requirements. We will go over each of these items, beginning with the reduced revenue due to the delay in rate increases. Reduction in anticipated state appropriations only received $2 million of the $46.4 million requested, and the city did not receive a $10 million grant for gravity sewer pipelining that were part of the last rate study. The next item are unfunded needs in the 5-year capital improvement program. Current rates will not support being able to obtain new loans or bonds. The current rates will not fund capital projects of R&R needs shown in the current dollars, such as wastewater treatment plant 1 expansion, wastewater treatment plant 1 upgrade and conversion, water treatment plant expansion, ground storage tanks, well field expansion, PEP system and reclaim system upgrades, sewer pipe and manhole lining, water meter changeouts and meter transmitter battery replacements, well field, wells, lift, pump station, R&R.
Pause for a second, Carl. Did we get that $2 million? I thought.
We received $2 million for land acquisition for a future RIB site.
Okay, all right, Roger.
But we
I'm
received
sorry.
an appropriation.
I'm sorry, okay, got it. Yes, sir.
Utility currently has 166 full-time positions. Additional staff is necessary and programmed over the next 5 years in various divisions of utility to address various items such as increased service demand. Growing need for services requires additional resources to maintain quality and efficiency. Regulatory compliance, which is essential to keep up with day-to-day operations that adhere to regulatory requirements. Grant management, dedicated to support needs to identify and manage grants, enabling cost-saving opportunities. Infrastructure repairs. Rising infrastructure failures necessitate immediate staffing for timely repairs. And just workload management. Excessive overtime due to workload is leading to staff burnout, impacting morale and productivity. This slide, touches upon project cost increases. Over the past 5 years, the increase in building cost vertical development was nearly double the increase in inflation. Non-building infrastructure, such as site work and utility work referred to in the industry as horizontal development, rose drastically over the past 5 years. Operating costs increase.
I'm sorry, Carl, I have a quick question, and I'm about a day late on this, but on the new positions slide, there's additional positions, new staff to be determined, listed at the bottom.
Yes.
When you all were doing projections, at what salary tier, and I guess generally speaking, what salaries did you use as a part of these projections? Did you use fully burdened? And for these new staffs, what did you use?
I would, if I remember correctly, these were like mid-pay grade staff positions. They were fully burdened, and they were also inflated based on where they fell in the 5-year plan. So there are so many positions each year, and there's various pay grades, but those two would have been either 1 high pay grade, 2 low pay grade, or 2 mid-grade positions.
Okay, so worked into the projections, though, we did not count these as fully burdened? They're just
They were fully burdened.
They are, okay, I just want to make sure.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So the next item to address is operational expenses. They encompass day-to-day costs such as labor, energy, chemicals, and equipment maintenance. These costs can fluctuate based on changes in the demand, flow, or loading of the system. Equipment maintenance can vary widely from facility to facility, but facilities with strong preventative maintenance programs usually have a much better understanding of the needs, resulting in lower costs when compared to facilities that follow a fix-it-when-it-breaks approach. Energy and chemicals will vary as the flow or loading to the system changes. Based upon a review by staff, material and equipment items increased from 4% to 114% just from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24. Staff also reviewed the past 5 years' operating costs to treat water and determined that the cost has increased 35.33% for each gallon of water treated. This is due to various factors. However, the primary cost increases are attributed to chemicals and electricity. The last item to address is the requirements of the consent decree for the City of Palm Coast with an effective date of December 12, 2024. A consent decree is a legal document formalizing a utility action plan and is scheduled to increase wastewater system capacity and performance. It was issued by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. The City of Palm Coast received the consent decree due to the wastewater treatment facility number 1 being operated over the permitted average annual flow of 6.83 MGD 4 months during the previous 12 months. Sanitary sewer overflows occurred from wastewater collection system, and some samples at Plant 1 failed to meet parameters. The consent decree identified items to be completed in the utility action plan, with these major items consisting of completing a wastewater treatment plant number 1, rehabilitation, conversion, and expansion by December of 2028, reducing wastewater spills in the community, and eliminating wastewater sampling exceedances.
Carl, going back to that slide, the major items to be completed in the utility action plan, if we look at slide 31, which are the unfunded needs in the 5-year CIP, which of these specific projects will accomplish the major items to be completed in the DEP agreement?
Could you repeat that question?
Sure. So if we're looking at the major items to be completed in the utility action plan,
Yes.
and then we go back and look at slide 31, which has the unfunded needs in the 5-year CIP, which of those needs in the 5-year CIP will directly help us achieve the 3 items listed here, the major items to be completed?
Yeah, so currently the unfunded needs, I would say the water treatment plant 1, due to its costs, we would have to get a bond, and the current rates will not support a bond, so we would consider that an unfunded need that's in our current plan.
Just to clarify, wastewater treatment plant 1.
Wastewater plant
Yes.
1. Some spills in the community, we are addressing some of those in our current CIP plan, so the primary one is the plant 1 expansion and conversion.
Okay, so in the unfunded needs for the 5-year CIP, the wastewater treatment plant 1 expansion for $180 million is what we need to meet these action plan priorities for the DEP agreement. Is that an accurate statement?
Correct. I mean, that would also assist with, hopefully, the sampling exceedances, because that's during high rain events and the flow of treatment through the plant. So the equalizing tank and other things we're doing in that project will help that. I don't know if it'll eliminate them, but it should add some benefit to that as well.
Okay, now, the conversion, the update and conversion at $90 million, Are there cost savings to doing that at the same time as the expansion? And if so, what are those cost savings?
There would be some cost savings due to some of the same materials with membranes. Integration of work would only have to occur once. They'd be similar contractors and subcontractors on site that could be working in tandem. While they're working on the expansion, there may be some pieces that they can do ahead of time on the existing plant. And some of the existing plants that needed some R&R. So if we delay, we'd be spending money on R&R to then later convert it. And having the contractor on site, I couldn't tell you how much the savings it would be, but we know there is some savings tied to combining with the current construction, having the trades there, being able to continue work with those trades there, as well as our purchasing power.
Maybe, Vice Mayor, I can help you just a little bit. If you recall, when we moved forward with the construction of the fire stations at the same time, it was about $800,000 to $900,000 of cost savings because we were constructing them at the same time. We're not there quite yet in the design process of wastewater treatment plant, one, to have a hard figure like that yet, right? So we need to get 100% design, and we need to understand the construction cost by working with our construction manager at risk. So we are working through that process, but we don't have a locked-in hard figure on what the actual cost savings will be until we're further along in the process.
Okay, thank you for that. So that leads me to another question then. Well, let me ask this question first. Are we envisioning the update and conversion and the expansion to happen concurrently?
They would be staggered because we can't convert the plant until the expansion is up and running, but we can do some preliminary work that won't impact operations. There's some electrical work, and there's a new generator replacement, and there's things that can occur at the same time, but then once all the preliminary work we can do while the expansion is being built, the expansion would open, then we would convert the plant and then integrate everything together so it functions as one facility rather than two separate ones.
So based on city manager's comments, how did we come up with the projected costs for the expansion and the conversion?
Those came from our consultant engineer. We just had a kickoff meeting today to discuss the scope and fee with our CMAR, construction manager, and they're going to be looking at the current 30% plans, and then when 60% plans, they'll fine-tune that, and they'll give us better numbers on that. But these came from our consultant engineer based on their design and working through their contacts they have. That's the numbers they provided to us.
Okay, thank you.
So the final item here, I think I actually have one more slide, but
Carl, sorry, I had one more
Go ahead.
question.
Yep.
Related to the consent decree, can you speak on, what's the impact if we do not meet the consent decree? My understanding is some civil penalties and that each day not in compliance would constitute a separate instance, so things can get crazy real quick in terms of those penalties. Can you speak on that?
I'm not the best person to probably speak on that.
You got anything on that, city manager?
Yes, we can give you, I'm pretty sure we sent you an analysis of we sent you the consent decree and we sent you the analysis, but Councilmember Miller, you are correct that if we, now it's a negotiated agreement that the city and the DEP entered into. And so once we get to the point, if we're not compliant, we would need to renegotiate. But yes, there were fines that currently are in place, but we can do projects in lieu of those fines, which we are actively trying to mitigate. And those fines are above and beyond what is required per the DEP. So again, it's a negotiated agreement. If we get to 2028 and we're not keeping up our end, we would have to go through that process and could look at further fines.
And just one more thing to add. So city manager was correct, but what that thing is, first is the projects. The projects would have to be approved by DEP. And if you can't approve, if we don't come to some type of agreement, then the fines would come into play. And we are looking at it possible till the project is fixed or we have some type of agreement, we're dealing with fines more often than we would like.
Thank you, sir. Good, Councilman Miller?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Carl. Continue on.
So I wanted to go over, a utility billing for a residential customer. For a typical ITT residential lot, the utility billing includes charges for water, wastewater, garbage, and stormwater, with some also having irrigation if they utilize potable water with a separate irrigation meter. The sample bill falls within the range of a large grouping of residential customers with a usage of 2,730 gallons. For this customer, the water and sewer charges account for $75.92, which is roughly 50% of the total bill of $153.18. Trash accounts for $33.20 at 22% of the bill, stormwater at $32.87 at 21% of the bill, and irrigation at $11.09 at 7% of the bill. The key takeaway from this slide, water and sewer charges are only a portion of the utility bill. Based on this bill, this customer is paying 1.4 cents for each gallon of potable water and 1.3 cents for each gallon of wastewater treatment plant. And I just wanted to ask if there are any other questions before I turn the presentation over to Murray Hamilton from Raftellus.
Well, I have one thing, Carl, and for the general public, when most people say their water bill, they're talking about their city utility bill, and you need to understand that it's not just water, it's all those things that are added in there. Say garbage, for instance, that rate changes when was the last time we had a rate increase on the garbage? It's been recently, right?
So we did a contractual review, and that was 3 years ago, but the garbage rates are on the CPI index.
Yeah. So I just want the general public to know that some of that, your utility bill is not just water usage. It's wastewater, stormwater, all that. So continue on, Carl. Or I'm sorry, Murray, I think you're up.
Mr.
I'm
Mayor.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, I've had conversations, that I don't believe this utility bill is regulated in any way in terms of how it needs to be presented. So I think I've talked to city manager about if there's any way we can kind of make it more clear, the delineation of different services so that it's easier to read from the resident standpoint so they understand what they're receiving from this bill.
Thank you, Councilman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, what did you have?
Thank you. I had a question. So it doesn't appear that irrigation will be affected by these rate changes. Is that accurate?
No, all the rates will be increased.
Okay, so, because the way this is worded, it seems as if irrigation would not be affected. So we're looking at affecting water and sewer and irrigation.
And
by these-
reclaim as well. Every rate charge would be impacted.
And are we talking about base and usage for all of these?
Yes.
Carl, one more thing is, I really don't care for public irrigation. I think you should do a well yourself. Is us as a city, could we outlaw or take irrigation from our water system off, like make it standard? You cannot irrigate your lawn with city water. Could we do that?
Mayor, we'd have to look into that one.
Well, I'm
Now,
serious.
we hear you because a lot of water is wasted by irrigating lawns, right? And even if you look at plans coming from the University of Florida, they're trying to look at Florida native plants to be more in landscaping, design, and et cetera as we move forward. But we would have to go back and look in our codes to understand what our obligation is and if we could restrict it as well.
Okay, that's something to look at. And also, just for the public, Belterre, on Belterre, the irrigation systems are out there. are those recycled water, reclaimed waters?
If it's
It's a
ours.
split system.
If-
Some of it's on reclaim and some of it's being pumped water from the canal, for stormwater canals.
Okay, so
It's
we're
not potable water.
So when someone says, well, you guys have the sprinklers on when it's raining, it's all reclaimed water or canal water, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you, sir. Yes, Murray, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, for the record, my name is Murray Hamilton. I'm a certified public accountant and vice president with Raftalis. Raftalis is a utility rate and financial management consulting firm. Our Florida office is located in Maitland, Florida. In addition to bringing 30 years of experience to this project team, I've also worked on behalf of the city in several capacities for the past 15 years. As it relates to Carl's presentation that he just went through, there's a couple key points that I'd first like to kind of reiterate, at least for the council, if not those that are participating in our meeting. So, in Florida, most of our water and wastewater systems stand alone as separate departments within a local government, a nonprofit district, or a separate authority, or are operated by a publicly regulated utility. The financial management reporting includes all business-related activities. As Carl pointed out, they're referred to as enterprise funds, right? They're treated like a business. The utility rates are adopted to recover the annual budgeted expenditures of the system by also providing cash reserves to address unforeseen contingencies and natural disasters. Now, Carl said it, several times. The utility system by itself is a closed system, a closed enterprise fund. No monies come in from the general government to help offset the operating and capital costs. And likewise is true, revenues do not leave the utility system to benefit the other general funds. So it is, in fact, a closed system. It's very capital intensive. You saw all the slides that Carl went through about the fixed infrastructure, the treatment plant, the transmission facilities that have to be put in place. So they're heavily capital intensive. You have to have the treatment facilities constructed, the transmission mains constructed well in advance of new growth. This is one of the reasons that when you adopt and implement the capital facility fees, the impact fees that the city has done, it's oftentimes a recoupment of the costs that you've already invested in, either assets that are already in the books or assets that you're currently constructing. Some of the responsibilities of the utility system is first and foremost to maintain service reliability and safeguard the public health and safety by addressing the aging infrastructure, and also through water system quality improvements. When we talk about the capital plan tonight, which we're going to do, more than 35% of that total program cost is capital maintenance. There's a lot of discussion about the expansion-related improvements, but there's a lot of capital maintenance that needs to be completed. The utility system is responsible for meeting regulatory requirements enforced by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection through plant and lift station upgrades and improvements to reduce sewer infiltration and inflow. The system also is responsible for adding capacity in advance of new growth within the plant and transmission facilities in order to meet the needs of new development within their service territory. And then lastly, to invest in new technology integration when available to help improve efficiencies within the system. Now, as Carl pointed out, the city did complete the 2024 rate study, and the city staff wanted to ensure that new development and redevelopment within the community were paying their proportionate share of the capital costs based on the demands that those new customers would place on the system. The city council did adopt a schedule of capital facility fees, those are the impact fees, along with additional mainline extension charges that are phased in through May of fiscal year 2027. As Carl did point out, under Florida statute, you'll have an opportunity to revisit those fee levels here in about 3 years as we get into fiscal year 2028. At the conclusion of the rate study, my understanding is that the City Council at the time was looking for additional information about the utility needs and other options. The City Council implemented the annual indexing provision. This is an automatic annual adjustment each and every year in lieu of a rate study. At the time, the published index was 3%, and it became effective October 1st of 2024. With the index going into place, city staff updated and have prioritized the operating and capital needs of the utility program. City staff initiated an evaluation of the utility service charges. Those are some of the items that Carl went through in his presentation. In evaluating the current operating conditions of the utility system, they've incurred operating cost increases resulting from prolonged inflation, increased costs to add additional personnel to maintain existing service levels and to meet the needs of new customers. And of course, Carl pointed out they've had lost revenue opportunities, seeking state appropriations of as much as $40 million and being left with about $1 to $2 million in awards. Delays in implementing rate adjustments, and of course, lost grant opportunities. Slide 5 provides you a partial list of the total capital plan. These are the critical projects that have been identified by staff. It represents 60% of the expenditures over the next 5 years. One of the primary reasons that we've highlighted these items on slide 5 is most of these projects here are the ones that are earmarked to be funded with long-term debt. So again, to be financed over a longer period of time, to be repaid by the utility customers that are going to benefit from those improvements.
Murray, may I stop you for a moment? So I'm looking at this slide in comparison to slide number 31, which we looked at with Carl a few minutes ago. The wastewater treatment plant expansion cost on that one was $180 million. What is the rehabilitation? What does that entail?
So Madam Vice Mayor, Carl said it pretty quick. His estimates were based on current costs. And so when we take the city's estimates, their engineering estimates, and we put them into our financial model, they get escalated for inflation over time, based on what year they align within the forecast period.
And 90 million of, mine had a separate 90 million for the rehab, the conversion. His is lumped together. The expansion conversion is built into his number, the 265.
Okay,
With
because
inflation.
those two together, yeah, so the 90 that you had plus the 180 equals 270.
Well, equals
270,
Yeah.
right? I do words, not numbers, but I'm pretty sure it's 270. So you're saying that this expansion rehabilitation at 265 includes those two things?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
So again, as we showed on the prior slide, city staff has identified several capital improvements that will provide long-term benefits to existing and future customers. After going through our flow of funds analysis and exhausting other revenue sources like the capital facility fees, we believe the use of revenue bonds is an appropriate means to recover those costs from customers who will benefit from the improvements over an extended period of time. Our primary objective was to update the utility financial forecast and work with the city's financial advisor to examine financing strategies. Our rate study approach is a pretty comprehensive process. In first addressing the overall cash flows of the utility system, again, we address all the business attributes of the operations, from customer sales and revenues to operating expenses to the capital program and any existing and projected principal and interest payments on the debt service obligations of the utility system. We prepare what's referred to as a flow of funds analysis. Basically, what we're trying to do is identify what reserve fund levels might be available or committed to the program, especially when we're trying to phase in rate adjustments, which, when we get to our scenarios later on that we examined, that really was our goal there, is to try and levelize them to the extent that we could and provide level adjustments for the period of time that was needed. We evaluated the overall revenue sufficiency of the system. And then lastly, we make sure that we're in compliance with all of the loan agreements and city policies as it relates to working capital reserves. Our financial position influences our credit standing and the city's overall borrowing rate in the bond market. We've got several slides that'll cover some of the major assumptions incorporated into the study. The first of which are the system gross revenues. A technical term is basically, it's the operating revenue of the system, excluding any restricted income, such as your capital facility fees, your impact fees. Those go directly from their restricted accounts to help offset the capital expenditures within their respective CIP plans. In the forecast of revenues, first and foremost, it's based on the most recent actual results for the year completed in fiscal year 2024. The city did adopt and implement a 3% index consistent with your policy on October 1st of 2024. That's captured here as well. And an annual average growth rate of new connections to the system of about 3% per year on average. That's what's represented in the forecast of revenues. The current revenues at roughly $70 million for fiscal year 2025 is estimated to grow to about $79 million by fiscal year 2029. The next couple slides are going to summarize what we refer to as the annual revenue requirements. It's the operating expenses, the capital improvements program, and the debt service payments on the utility obligations. So the first stop on operating expenses, cost of operations and maintenance. This represents 55% of the annual budget. The amounts are predicated based on the adopted 2025 spending levels. However, we have reduced the annual expenses to account for what I refer to as the budget to actual differences. Your utility system, on average, spends only 90% of the approved operating expenses in any given year. And by slightly reducing our expense projections, this is our attempt to not set the rates too high, the rate path. We have had to make allowances for future inflation. We did that in consultation with city staff and providing estimates of what future costs may look like, in addition to new personnel needs. Over the 5-year forecast period, the annual average increase in operating expenses, it averages about 7.4% per year on average, or from about $38 million in the current fiscal year to approximately $50.5 million by fiscal year 2029.
Murray, I have a question. So it looks like if we look at the projected cost of operations chart next to the projected gross revenues at existing rates, it appears we're covering our costs of operations and maintenance by about $30 million each year. Would that mean that based on the current rates, $30 million would be going to CIP?
Not entirely to CIP, but there's a large portion that does go to CIP. So the first stop in the flow of funds analysis, as required by the lending agreements, the lending agreements tell us what we get to do with revenues. So as we collect revenues, the first stop is we're required to pay our operating expenses. The second obligation is to set enough money aside in what's referred to as the sinking fund, right? So that we can pay our principal and interest payments on our debt. I don't have the number right in front of me, but there's probably a third of that $30 million easily goes right to debt service before we're even getting to capital maintenance. Your capital maintenance budget is probably another $10 to $15 million a year on average over this forecast period. That's the transfer that goes to your R&R fund. So that definitely is capital related. And then there are some other small internal indirect cost allocation transfers that are required within the city as well that accounts for that also.
So then what would you say out of this extra, and I'm rounding, okay, obviously, 30 million, could go to these future projects, this future 5-year CIP, right now based on the current numbers?
In 2025, as it's budgeted, we have 17.9 million that is completely going to the R&R fund. And everything else is fully utilized for either operating expenses, debt service, or required transfer.
Okay, now, debt service, is the current debt that we have, is any of that, any of those bonds, any of those loans going towards anything in this future CIP, or is that all for projects that are not included in this?
The existing debt are for prior projects. We do have an SRF loan that's currently in progress, and we're treating that as a proposed loan. But you are under an agreement for that loan.
And that's
And
represented.
there are project costs in your CIP associated with that agreement because it's in progress.
Okay, so is it a fair estimate then, could we say, and I want us to be conservative, but could we say that 17.9 million between fiscal year 25 and 29 could safely be said to go towards R&R at the current rates?
We then have inflation to deal with, right? So inflation chips away at our ability to continue to sustain that level of capital funding. But on average, just for capital maintenance, on average, you have to fund $15 million a year. You'll see that in the CIP slide later on when we show you the pay-as-you-go capital maintenance. The primary issue on the capital maintenance side is that it's well over $200 million in this 5-year forecast period. The spending curve that you're talking about there, that $15 to $17 million threshold, which is the transfer to the R&R fund, is only, I say only, it's $90 million of that more than $200 price tag. And so when it comes to capital maintenance and we talk about the idea of borrowing bonds in order to help extend the funding out into the future, which I think is appropriate here, we're anticipating borrowing about $150 million just for the sole purpose to maintain our current infrastructure that serves our existing residents.
And I'll just add on to that. The SRF loan he talked about, you don't start paying that till it's complete, and that's for the wastewater plant 2 expansion. So coming next year, our debt payment is going to go up. And typically, the way the budgets work now is at the end of the year, the reason it was 17 million, that wasn't the original number, but there was excess reserve because we didn't spend all of the money budgeted, and that is what brought it up to the 17 million for this current year. So, you know, that's where that came from. So we do utilize as much funds as we can into R&R, but the R&R needs far exceed the dollars available.
This is that next slide on slide 11. So we've got 2 charts here. And I know I purposely kind of made one a little smaller than the other, and I apologize to the audience that they can't read that now. On the left-hand side is the total capital cost by utility program. And there's 4 primary programs. Up in the right-hand corner of that where it's blue, that's the water expansion program, funded with, that generally meets the expansion needs of the water system. That's 20%, and then wastewater is 45% of the total of the program. So collectively, your expansion needs are 65% of the overall program expenditures over the next 5 years. To the left side of that same chart, capital maintenance, again, renewal and replacement program, again, $237 million, 34% of this total program. And then lastly, at the top, that 1% contribution is from internal funding towards a portion of the cost of the Municipal Operations Center. More importantly, on the right-hand side is the projected funding sources to help balance the overall program cost, $701 million over the next 5 years. The program began with a prioritized list of the capital projects. It took many attempts in order to lower the overall adjustments relative to the rate study outcomes. You know, our early results within our rate study process initially indicated the need to increase water, wastewater, irrigation, and reclaim rates by more than 50% in the first 3 years of the forecast period. To say the least, you know, staff worked really hard in order to help reevaluate and prioritize the lineup of the various projects and the timing of the expenditures, and also had us work diligently with your financial advisor in order to help develop some options to help lower those impacts to the extent that we could. In regards to the chart on the right again, the overall funding sources, from 30,000 feet, approximately 70% of the total program is assumed to be funded with long-term debt. Specifically, the SRF loan that Carl was talking about before, but two prospective bond issues. One possibly as early as October of 2025 to coincide with the need to begin construction later this year, and a second prospective bond issue as early as October of 2027. The remaining plan, 30%, is projected to be funded with rates, fees, and charges. If we look at the right side of that program, you'll see that $90.8 million, it's in dark green. That's the capital maintenance portion. Madam Vice Mayor, that's the $15 to $17 million a year in transfer that we were talking about. That's the pay-as-you-go capital. There's a portion there, $125 million, that will be funded directly with the use of impact fee revenues. So again, on a pay-as-you-go basis as those revenues come in. And then again, we get into the various loans.
I had a question about the impact fees. So on the right side, we see 125 million roughly. And then on the left side, we see expansion that equals roughly $450 million. So why aren't we using more impact fees? Is this because this is exhausting the impact fees that we project, or because, you know, by Nexus, we should be able to use impact fees for more if we have.
We're using all the impact fees we have available, and when you build a plant, you can't build it after they come. You have to, you know, so we're building a plant for future needs as well. So you haven't collected those dollars yet.
No, understood that that's projected based on future growth, right? That we're getting those revenues, but I'm just making sure
Right,
that.
we're exhausting all our capacity fees first before we take out a bond, yes.
Thanks.
So then that dovetails into my question, because I hear what you're saying about not being, you know, you have to build it, Field of Dreams, build it, and they will come, right? Like, we've got the infrastructure there. That's what has to be in place in order to accommodate the new people coming in. I get that. But are we able to pay back any of these loans with those impact fees that come later?
Legally, absolutely. And they are a pledged revenue within the lending agreements. The fact of the matter is, as you just heard, we just don't have enough income that's coming in. But to the extent, if you didn't have another project to fund, you're going to continue to collect those impact fees out into the future, and you're going to be able to apply. You would be allowed to apply those impact fees to the expansion-related portion of the debts, not the R&R portion of any debts, but the expansion-related portion of the debt. So yes.
And there are some limitations because it's not guaranteed revenue, so you can't pledge only future impact fees that may or may not come to fruition.
Right. No, I understand that. And I also understand that one of the reasons we're talking about raising the base is because when we're looking at bond issuers, that's a more reliable income source. But is there some type of policy currently that's in place with staff that says when we get impact fees, we're going to work to pay down debt rather than think about more things that we can spend money on? Is there a policy like that?
Well, there's certain, DEP has certain policies as well where it says once you reach certain capacities in the plants, you need to start designing and planning. So you're going to be obligated to plan for those things as well. I don't think there is to answer your question, there is no policy
Okay.
regarding that.
That would be
I would
incumbent upon the
suggest
council to prioritize.
Well, that and back to Mr. Hamilton's point, it's in your lending agreements of how we're obligated to pay off what source first, right? So we need to make sure we are putting toward, that's dictating also your policy as well. And we do have a policy on how we manage our debt.
No, yeah, and it's a good policy. We do have a strong policy as far as us managing our debt.
You're talking about early payoff.
No, I'm not talking about early payoff. What I'm saying is rather than, I think there's a general feeling that governments act on a tax and spend kind of model. I'm not saying that our staff does that. What I am saying is as we get impact fees, rather than thinking about, ooh, we've got all these impact fees, we can now expand and build more, like that being the first thought, is there the initial thought of how can we pay down debt first rather than going immediately to further expansion if that expansion isn't needed? And I'm just asking what the trend has been. It doesn't even look like we've collected enough impact fees to get there. Is that accurate?
Right. We haven't been able to keep up with capacity needs with the impact fees we're collecting currently. Yes, ideally in the future, impact fees are going to be more, but we're not going to build something if we don't need it. I mean, in the past, when we had the downturn from 2012 to 2020, we delayed all these capital projects because there wasn't a need for the capacity. So we had them in the 5-year plan, but we didn't move forward with them because there wasn't a need.
And to that, when we're looking at wastewater treatment plant 3, what is the projection for when we'll need that expansion?
It depends where development occurs. If it occurs in the northwest, then it'll be different than if it occurs on that Old King Road South corridor and other parts of the city down by the airport. So it depends on where development occurs. So as in future years, we plan to move forward with the feasibility study on Plant 3 to look at how we can redirect flows, what makes the most sense, where does it go, how are we going to discharge the fluid. So we have a high-level plan in place. And then we'll be tracking development, and as we hit certain projections over the future years, we'll determine where is it Plant 3 down south going to be next, or is it going to be something, in the northwest part of the city going to be next?
Do we have any, we don't have any projections yet as to that?
We don't know where people are going to build,
Well, we know entitlements though.
We know entitlements. Our current Plant 1 will handle what's been permitted currently. We won't need Plant 3 to handle the current permitted projects that are out there, either on the existing ITT lots or the DOs that have been issued.
Okay.
But we can use a percentage of the impact fees to pay towards that debt. If we incur debt because of, as far as expansion, the need for output.
Right.
That is correct.
In our current 5-year plan, we're showing all the impact fees collected to pay for capacity projects so we borrow less money.
Okay.
So in this 5-year plan, we're spending all those impact fees so we don't borrow as much money. But beyond the 5 years, that could be something we look at.
And again, that's because it's the highest and best use of those monies in the current time.
So it's safe, well, we've already been through this before, Vice Mayor, on the argument about impact fees back when it first came up last year. Most of the people here was, to include myself, were here in the room when all that went down. We have to be focused on using those impact fees to pay towards what it's costing our community. And would it be fair to say that, so they just raised it last year in 2024, March, right? The impact fees. So the time before that would have been 2020. What happened in 2020? Well, I know we were during COVID and then we had that boom, but was there any increase in impact fees in 2020 or 2019?
Mayor, the last study that was done was back in 2017.
Okay, so what we're experiencing is exponential growth, and now it's catching up with us because of the COVID, the break from COVID, and then you can see the chart as far as growth. You know, we had all that, and then the downturn in 08, 09 through 11, and we're not even at the level we were at pre-COVID as far as lots. Am I correct, Carl?
Yeah, that is correct, but you look at that chart and, you know, construction costs, operating costs, everything has skyrocketed. You know, it's not just, you know, development.
As we say in my previous career, we are in a tight spot. Continue on, Murray, please. Unless we have other questions.
Yeah, I just had a comment to that point. At the Florida League of Cities, when they discussed, you know, the legal requirements of impact fee increases via rate studies, they essentially said that because of the limitations of the law, that the only time you're going to be actually capturing costs is that first year, and then every year after that, you're falling behind inflation. So we're in this endless cycle of, you know, no matter how much we raise them, if we adopt 100% of the allowable increase, we're always going to be a little bit behind the curve because of that, because of the way the laws are written.
And Mayor, just to correct the record, staff has let me know that the impact fees were previously approved September of 2018, not 17. Just want to clarify.
Okay, that's fine. It's just, in hindsight's 2020, you know? All right, Carl, Murray, go right ahead.
Sorry, before,
Here we go.
because, we're on the subject. The statute says that under extraordinary circumstances, we can actually raise the impact fees above and beyond what the normal cap would be. So I look to legal counsel, what is considered an extraordinary circumstance? Because I would think that being under the thumb of a DEP agreement and having to being forced essentially to put hundreds of millions of dollars in improvements in is an extraordinary circumstance.
So there is, there is very little to no case law on this defining extenuating circumstances. So I don't have that specific answer you're looking for. The statute does say that, but you're also looking at, I think you have to have 2 workshops after you do your analysis, and then you have to have 2 more ordinance reviews, the normal first read and second read of that. And then also the statute requires that it has to be passed by 2/3 of the council. So it would have to be a 4 out of 5 approval of this council. I don't have that answer for you that you're looking for, Vice Mayor. I would argue what we're up against is the rest of the state not going through similar situations? Are they not having extenuating circumstances? Did we as city council not see this coming 4 years ago or 2 years ago? That's what would be the other end of that. I agree, this is special circumstances, but the other side is like, how could you guys not foresee this? Is that the rest of the state, are they not going through extensive circumstances as well? That's what you're up against.
Okay, yeah, well, without the legal support, I wouldn't be willing to go there, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'll save my comment for later, Murray. Go right ahead, sir.
Okay. So while working with city staff and the city's financial advisor, we've also identified several goals and other considerations related to our study. You know, first and foremost, we need to be able to fully fund the operating and capital requirements of the system over our study period. Quite frankly, we have to have a break-even cash flow. We should balance the budget, at least by the last year of the study period. We need to be able to demonstrate that we're in compliance with the city's reserve fund policies. We've also been asked to strive to maintain total unrestricted reserves equaling at least 4 months of gross revenues to help promote the creditworthiness of the utility system. Lastly, we have the need to establish net revenues sufficient to maintain a strong debt service coverage margin. That was that ratio that I was describing earlier, the order of use of revenues minus operating expenses. Again, our financial position influences the city's credit standing, and your financial advisor has provided us a slide to help inform you on the city's history in regards to its credit rating. So I'm not the author of this slide 13, but I've got the privilege to present it to you here tonight. You know, in relating to the bond credit ratings, there are opinions of the relative credit worthiness and likelihood of repayment of principal and interest payments on bonds. The bond credit ratings are assigned by nationally recognized statistical rating organizations such as Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. Generally, the higher the credit rating assigned to the bonds, the lower the interest rate on the bonds due to a lower risk, all things being equal. And you can see in the chart on the left-hand side of this slide is a projection of the city's rating history, where you can see that over time, the city's published rates for the utility system, published ratings for the utility system have improved over time. On the far right-hand side, again, being a layperson and not a financial advisor, the top two ratings at the top highlight a stable outlook under your current ratings. The next step in our process of the study was to evaluate some financing scenarios and alternatives. Again, as I pointed out, city staff asked us to work with Hilltop Securities, that's the city's financial advisor, to address options to fund approximately $284 million in bonds as early as October of 2025, and a second series of bonds of approximately $172 million as early as October of 2027. So the financial advisor provided us 4 scenarios. We've got a slide later on, it's slide 17, that will provide the city council and residents with a graphical illustration of the outcomes of each one of those cases. Quite frankly, as we go through the various scenarios, there are conflicting goals. When comparing the lowest borrowing costs versus the impact on rates. So we're looking for some type of balance within the overall funding strategy in order to meet the needs of the customer as well as the lowest cost opportunity. The first scenario is described as with level annual debt service payments. Quite frankly, this is the lowest cost option. It looks like a traditional home mortgage. Payments are often over a 30-year time period. They're level, same period, same payment in each period. One of the downsides is that typically with this type of loan repayment, the first payments become due before the projects are even complete. So when you issue bonds, you're typically issuing bonds and drawing those proceeds, and then you're spending those proceeds amount over a 36-month period, so 3 years. Under this first scenario, level debt service payment, typically your first payment is due at the end of the first year. So you haven't completed the project, you haven't added any new customers to help repay the loan. So the financial advisor ran an alternative, that's scenario 2, where they make use of some mechanisms to capitalize some interest and delay some repayment of the obligation. It allows an opportunity in order to phase in a rate adjustment a little bit more. But as you'll see, both scenarios 1 and 2, when we get to our graphical chart, create a little bubble. There's a peak in the forecast period early on that requires a need for cash that the ratepayers would have to step in and fulfill. So the financial advisor provided us a couple more alternatives. Scenario 3, their technical term is wraparound debt service. How I like to describe this is the financial advisor is looking at all the debt service payments for the entire utility system as a whole, looking at it holistically and trying to levelize all loan payments for as long as possible. This provides an opportunity to avoid any spikes during the repayment period. It also provides better equity when ensuring that future customers who will benefit from those system improvements will pay their proportionate share. Alternatively to that scenario 3, again, kind of consistent with scenario 2, the financial advisor made use of some capitalized interest alternatives as well as some delayed repayment of the principal amount of those bonds when considering when compared to scenario 3. But as you could imagine, that comes with a a higher price tag. And you'll see that here in our next slide. So this is slide 7. Again, it represents a summary of the total senior lien obligations for the water, wastewater, irrigation, and reclaimed water system. This represents the projected annual principal and interest payments on both the existing and future obligations. Using scenario 1 and scenario 2 as our first description, for those that can view the chart, scenario 1 is the solid green bar, is the solid green bar, and you'll see that there's an increase in loan payments in roughly the first 5 to 7 years of the forecast period. And then scenario 1, the payments decrease over time as a portion of the existing loans get paid off. In comparison to scenario 1 is scenario 2, where the financial advisor makes use of some capitalized interest and deferred repayment. That's the dotted green line for scenario 2. If you notice, you get a little bit more time, maybe an extra year or 2 before the cost increase much greater, but you can see a much higher peak for scenario 2 with debt service costs reaching approximately $43 million per year, somewhere between fiscal year 2031 and 2034. And then again, it follows a similar trend line as scenario 1 as those existing loans get paid off over time. In talking about scenario 3, which again is where the financial advisor looks holistically at the system and tries to levelize all debt service payments for as long as possible. That's what's represented in the solid red line. It is, quite frankly, the lowest cost option for our forecast period, as well as scenario 3 helps to balance the who pays, who's benefiting largely from these long-lived assets that we're constructing and who should be repaying them. And so again, that's one of the reasons to levelize those payments to the extent that we can over time. And then lastly, scenario 3 is a function of scenario 4 is a function of scenario 3, but the financial advisor makes use of some capitalized interest as well as deferred principal repayment. That's the dotted red line in this particular chart, and you can see that it's slightly higher than the scenario 3. In working with your financial advisor as well as city staff, we identified both scenarios 1 and scenario 3 as being ideal for evaluating what the impacts might look like on customer rates. So our next slide, this is slide 18 within the presentation, provides a summary of both scenarios, scenario 1 and scenario 3. Again, as I pointed out here earlier in our presentation tonight, our initial preliminary results within our study first showed the need for annual increases as much as 15% each year in the first 3 years of the forecast period. And as I've pointed out several times to City Council, staff has worked to enhance the priority list within the capital improvements program and sought out additional financing options from the financial advisors in order to help drive the rate increases lower. In thinking about our two cases, scenario 1 versus scenario 3, scenario 3 is our recommended case. When thinking about scenario 3 does have a higher present value cost. What I mean by that is over the long term, if you were to add up the total payments made on the bonds, they're going to be greater than under scenario 1. Again, that's that holistic approach, that long-term forecast. So the net present value cost increase of approximately $21, that's the present value cost, relative to scenario 1. But scenario 3 does result in a customer bill impact that's about 8% less than scenario one. So there's a long-term cost, but the overall bill impact is less. And I would again highlight to the council that over that 30-year repayment period, you're going to continue to add new customers to help repay those obligations. What's recommended here is a 4-year rate plan in lieu of an index. So the city does have an adopted annual index provision, so these rate adjustments are in lieu of the index. Speaking about scenario 3, that's our recommended case. The first adjustment, 8%, would be applied as early as April 1st of 2025, and the next increase would start each October 1st thereafter, so as early as October 1st of 2025, another 8%. The 8% increases are applied to all the rates uniformly. I think that question was asked earlier. The monthly base charge increases 8%. The variable and usage rates increase 8%. It impacts water and wastewater, irrigation, and reclaimed water service. For customers that have unique bills, and many customers do have unique bills, it is in fact an 8% increase. We've tried to provide some bill examples here for a small residential customer with water and wastewater use of 2,500 gallons and a residential bill with moderate use of 4,000 gallons. While I would not tell you that either of those bills are the system average, they are common bills that occur within your system. Yes, Councilman.
I have a question. It may not be a you question. Maybe Carl, city manager, can help me out here. So in terms of the index, obviously that changes based on what's happening with our economy and inflation. I know it's an option, but do we always adopt the index in years that are not a rate study increase year?
That's been our past practice, and we've also tried to get the various specialties under the specialty index. Like whenever the solid waste contract was reviewed, we went with the index for trash hauling. There is a special index for that particular one, and the same similar context for utilities.
More specific to the exact service that's being provided?
Correct.
So when we're talking about, say, an 8% increase, the assumption would be that if we did not do this, we would still be doing a 3% increase.
Yeah, the 10-year average on the recommended utility portion, the 10-year average is 4%.
Okay. So in looking at these are not just, we're adding 9.5 or 8%. It's in lieu of potentially a 4% increase on average over the last 4 years, or 10 years, sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry, because I asked this question of Mr. Hamilton yesterday. These numbers are in addition to what we've already done, aren't they?
Those were, I believe, Madam Vice Mayor, those were 2 different points.
Okay.
The point that Carl was making, as I did, the recommended 8% adjustments each year, okay, if you're taking the 8% by themselves, so let's look at 2026. In lieu of an index, 8% is in lieu of the index. If we did the index instead, which the 10-year average is 4%, what you're capturing in 2026 is 4% above the index. To your point, because you raised a question with me earlier about what's already been implemented in 2025, and that's a good and valid point. That's that first column where it says interim rate, effective October 1st, 2024. You're absolutely correct, Madam Vice Mayor. October 1, 2024, a 3% index did go into effect already. You're correct, in the current year.
Okay. Okay, I want to make sure that we're on the same page as far as what that 8% is inclusive of.
Right.
Okay,
Understood.
thank you.
So again, in relation to the bill examples that are shown here, we've looked at the customer billing profiles. They do tend to cluster around 1 to as much as 4,500 gallons per month. I will point out, you do have about 20% of your residential customers that use well over 6,000 gallons a month. So, you do have a wide range of usage, but if the rate recommendations are adopted, again, it would be a 8% adjustment. Now, again, when looking at the overall scenarios, the basis for the rates, again, relate to our reserve fund levels. You can see that in the middle of each one of these tables. The compliance test, it's referred to as Test A and Test C, so we need to make sure that we're in compliance with those lending agreements. And then the third test is the overall cash flows of the system that we're going to look at on the subsequent slide. And that's represented here on slide 19. And again, as I mentioned to you earlier in our presentation, in the flow of funds analysis, trying to identify what reserve funds we have in order to help phase in rate adjustments to the extent that we can. I hope this tries to help communicate that that's in fact, what we did. We've got 5 years of projected need. 2 of the 5 years, we don't have enough adequate revenues to cover everything. All things being equal, we would do a much greater increase in 2026 than that 8% increase in order to avoid having to spend $6 million in reserves to bridge the gap. But again, we've set this plan in motion where we can afford to do that and continue through the 5-year forecast period, assuming that we're implementing those rate increases. We're using reserves again in fiscal year 2028, another roughly $5.5 million in 2028 in order to bridge the gap under that rate plan. And by fiscal year...
Under the current rate plan?
Excuse me, Councilman?
This is under the current rate plan?
This is the recommended rate plan for scenario 3.
Okay, gotcha.
And so again, using $5.5 million under the proposed rates in fiscal year 2028 in order to bridge that gap, and then by the last year of the forecast period, by fiscal year 2029, that we would have a break-even cash flow. And over that period of time, our overall shortfall by the last year is about $30 million in revenue that we need. And so that's what that 8% per year for the first 4 years. And by the last year, fiscal year 2029, I don't think I got to this point in the prior slide, that 5th year where we showed 4% CPI is where we anticipate that the city would re-implement its annual indexing provision, or at least consider that, with an adjustment of not less than 4%, which, as Carl pointed out, is the 10-year running average.
So looking at this bar chart, and this is obviously rough because we're looking at, a bar chart. It appears we're about 20 million short for fiscal year 26 and 27, and then about 30 million short for fiscal years 28 and 29. Is that roughly accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the reason for that movement is, remember the 2 prospective bond issues that we were talking about. The first is anticipated to come on in 2026. The second is anticipated to come on in 2028. And so that's why you're seeing that dramatic shift between the year 2 and 3 and year 4 and 5 within that plan. So the other thing that, mainly because I've had a lot of conversations and a lot of briefings at different levels within the city and the organization, and some of your customers may have some of the same curiosities. And that's why, Carl and I have tried to reinforce the idea that, this is an enterprise fund. Right? It's a closed system. We've had to make some assumptions, right? Obviously, I think the first bond issue is key to this. City staff needs bond proceeds as early as October of 2025, this year, in order to begin the construction of those projects. The second bond issue, is somewhat perspective. I will tell you that I suspect that your staff is going to look for ways to seek additional grants, other external fundings. I know the City Council is going to be looking at those opportunities to do that. In addition to that, There are opportunities through the state revolving fund loan in order to get low interest rate and subsidized loans. In some cases, principal forgiveness. That may not be an opportunity here. And so I know the staff's going to continue to plan and look for ways to augment the program. We're asking the City Council to consider adopting the 4-year rate plan. That would be the most solid credit going into the bond market to market those bonds, along with the annual indexing provision. To the extent the program performs better than what's been assumed here. Again, it is a closed system. And during those bond issuance processes, there's going to have to be an update to the studies. The City Council always has the wherewithal to revisit what those rate adjustments are going to be. And again, the starting point is going to be that flow of funds analysis. What reserve funds did we collect in excess, if any, of what we planned for, and how can we use those reserve funds for the betterment of the system? And I've been told by staff that the first opportunity is going to be trying to lower that second bond issue and avoid those debt service costs. So again, I wanted to highlight what the ask was of City Council, reinforce the fact that it is in fact a closed system, and if we perform better, then we have some opportunity to adjust and respond to that. Consistent with the recommendations that we've made here, we did put together a couple comparisons for your information. This is slide 20. This isn't meant to be a report card. I call this the cost of doing my business. Everybody asks me, what's my neighbor charging? So again, in the same spirit of what you saw on the previous slide where we showed you the rate impact of Scenario 1 and Scenario 3, this is Scenario 3, our recommended rates. We have a small user on the left-hand side, and we have a moderate user on the right. You'll see the existing rates that, again, became effective October 1st of 2024. Those are the rates that are currently in place for fiscal year 2025, and the proposed rate to be effective on or after April 1st of 2025. So again, you have that represented here. I'll point out, you may want to make some note here, after we had published this comparison, Carl contacted me and he was interested in what the rates were for Flagler Beach. And so I wanted to give you that information verbally if I can. For the small user bill for Flagler Beach, this is water and wastewater combined. The current bill for 2,500 gallons residential use is $100.36. On the moderate user, the Flagler Beach bill for 4,000 gallons is $125.44. And the last thing I'd like to point out for all of these surveyed utilities is it's very difficult to try and track all the taxes within the utilities. These are the utility rates, the revenues collected by the utility system that stay within the utility system. And so that's what's represented here within these comparisons. We've got a couple slides on our observations and conclusions, and then we do want to highlight some next steps for the City Council. So again, as we've highlighted tonight, the existing rates are not adequate to fully fund the projected revenue requirements of the system. The city's financial advisor prepared several financing scenarios to provide strategies to help us phase in rate adjustments over time. Scenario 3 is based on the wrapped around bonding structure, the one where the financial advisor looked at the holistic view of the annual debt service payments, and it does not make use of any capitalized interest costs. It's a balanced approach between the city's opportunity to phase in the rates and provide a level repayment schedule over time. As I pointed out before, it also helps to balance the who pays. The fact that future customers are going to benefit from these long-lived assets. And then lastly, when thinking about Scenario 1, our recommended case results in a customer bill that is about 8% lower than Scenario 1. We recommend that the city implement the proposed rate adjustments identified for scenario 3, beginning with bills rendered on and after April 1st, 2025. The next adjustment would be roughly 6 months later, as early as October 1st of 2025 at the start of fiscal year 2026, and carry on through October 1st of 2027. Beginning on and after October 1st of 2028, the city should continue to increase the monthly rates for, again, water, wastewater, irrigation, and reclaimed water service based on the annual change in the U.S. CPI Water and Sewerage Maintenance Service Index as published on June 30 of each year, or 4%. And so that this is a change and an update to your current index provision. Your current index provision uses CPI, which has not been adequate to keep up with the maintenance expenses. So city staff was able to identify a more appropriate index that better aligned with their system costs. Some of the next steps, on March 4th, 2025, we anticipate that a first reading will be scheduled in order to introduce the rate ordinance. On March 18th of 2025, I understand that we've noticed a second reading for the public hearing of that ordinance. And on April 1st of 2025, we would anticipate that the first adjustments would become effective. We did work with your financial advisor in order to help set some expectations for the city council members, especially for those who have not worked through a public offering for utility system bonds. So Hilltop Securities provided us a very preliminary schedule about how to achieve bond proceeds as early as October 2025. And as they've indicated, that by May or June of this year, 2025, the financing team will need to be drafting their financing documents. That's going to include the authorizing bond resolution, the preliminary official statement, a consulting engineer's report, and then a bond feasibility report. As early as August of 2025, that's when many of those obligations would be submitted for approval, with the sale and closing of the bonds taking place somewhere about September or October of that cycle. It's a pretty comprehensive process. If I'm selected to be one of those financing team members, I would serve as the bond feasibility consultant in that role. Hilltop Securities as financial advisor is typically the leader. I'm the follower. But it's very comprehensive. The city council is going to get a lot of information relative to that program. And keep in mind, the estimates that we've provided you tonight relative to the bonds, the 2026 bonds, the future 2028 bonds, the prospective bonds, those were estimates that were put together by the financial advisor based on market conditions at the time that they ran those values and assumptions that they made when they put that information together. As the city makes its choice relative to its utility rates and whether or not the city elects to issue those bonds, those market conditions will vary at the time that you go to issue those instruments. And so conditions will change. And that, Mr. Mayor,
I have a
concludes
question.
the presentation.
Sorry. Did you have anything else? Sorry.
No, ma'am.
Okay. You said a few minutes ago that the current CPI is not enough to cover operations and maintenance. Is that an accurate?
That was an accurate restatement of what I said.
Okay, so I want to deconstruct these charts a little bit because from my viewing, without looking at the CIP, what we are bringing in is covering operations and maintenance. And then whatever the revenues that we bring in on top of that then go to debt service, CPI, CIP, all those things. Because if I'm looking at the chart, which is gross revenues on slide 45, for instance, for fiscal year 25, it shows we're bringing in about 70 million and operations and maintenance is coming in, this is on the next chart, at about 38 million. So it appears our revenues are covering our operations and maintenance and personnel.
That doesn't include the R&R. That's your normal maintenance.
Okay,
We're doing the transfer to the, sorry.
no, you're fine.
We're doing the transfer to the R&R, but that's not covering everything. Is that correct?
Well, R&R's on top of that slide with the green.
There's two pieces of maintenance. There's operating maintenance and there's capital maintenance. And so capital maintenance is that R&R transfer, and again, it's averaging roughly $15 million a year. That's not represented on this particular slide. This slide here is operating expenses by themselves. Even to your point, you're correct. Revenues exceed operating expenses. That's not surprising. It exceeds operating expenses in most utility systems. Your operating expenses represent only 55% of your operating budget. They should exceed your expenses. Now, we lose ground really quickly. You know, your operating expenses are growing at a rate of 7.5% every year for this 5-year forecast period, and revenues are only growing at 3%. So
Is the revenues growing at 3, though, based on current occupancy or based on growth projections for people coming in and being added as ratepayers?
both? Meaning people that are in their homes today, that's current occupancy, if I understood that question right, and then with new growth. Now, the growth, specifically the 3% growth rate, is because of new people coming onto the system. We're assuming that the homeowners that are in businesses that operate in the community today are going to continue their services at their current level. They could change their conditions. They could use more service. They could use less service.
Okay. So I look at what we're looking at here as you've provided the picture if we took everything on the a la carte menu. And when I say that, I mean I'm looking at slide 41, which is the critical projects identified by city staff.
Okay, let me find that. Okay.
So to me, if we weren't relying on taxpayers to pay for all of these, sure, let's do them all, why not? But we are. So I have to think to myself, what do we absolutely need in this moment? And for me, the only thing we need in this moment is expansion and rehabilitation of wastewater treatment facility 1. And these other items that are on here, yeah, I agree that these probably need to get done at some point, but do we need to raise rates at this level over the next 5 years? Because you're talking about a lot. The percentage over in that aggregate is a lot of money. So have we worked up this scenario to say, because per Carl, the DEP consent agreement really is only directly related to this number 1 at $265 million. Have we worked up this scenario to say, what would that cost our ratepayers, i.e. our taxpayers, over this 5-year period if that's the only thing that we choose on this menu to do?
Mayor, City Council, if I can. So we definitely understand the need for wastewater treatment plant number 1, right? But several of the projects on this list are making sure that we don't enter into another consent decree on the water side, that we're properly planning and putting these projects forward and accommodating for the residents' need for water service, right? DEP also has a policy that once you trip 80% of capacity, whether it's water or wastewater, that you need to start doing design projects for expansion. We are underway with a design expansion at Water Treatment Plant 1, and I believe we are working with Wright Pierce for water treatment plant number 3. Now, these are already POs that you guys have approved for going forward in that construction process. So once we're designed, this is providing those services. So while I understand the hesitation and only want to move forward with what we're being faced in the consent decree, we're also trying to lean in and not have a repeat of that again by properly planning for upgrading our existing infrastructure.
Okay, and I can appreciate that. And I think part of the reason we're in this position right now is because, well, A, we grew way too quickly and we didn't plan for that. I mean, if you look at the bar chart showing the growth, that's clear. Starting in about 2020, 2021, it went way up, and for the last 3 years, there's been uncontrollable growth. That's just my opinion, obviously. But that has exacerbated this issue. And I don't want that to happen again. But the market is cyclical, and there are ebbs and flows. And so what I also don't want is to say, we're going to go ahead and say, yep, let's do all these things. Let's go ahead and raise the rates on the taxpayer. And then if we have a chance of getting a better debt service, are we going to give that money back? Government never gives money back. So I'm hesitant to say, let's go ahead and do all of these things and raise the rates this much based on all of these things. So city manager or Carl, when you talk about the water that you just referenced, what projects in this list directly relate to that?
The second one, the third one, the fifth one down, the last 2.
And if you go back to the water treatment slide that I presented, because obviously water use depends. When it's drier weather, people use more water. And as our wells age, they produce less water as well. So we did exceed the DEP requirement last year. I think it was last June we exceeded it, and that was with reducing pressure in the system as well. So we're already tripped that level of the need to add capacity today. It's not something we're going to need in 5 years. It's not something, if we have future growth, there's going to be need for. There's already a need today to add water capacity, new wells, well field, water treatment expansion, water plant 1, the water quality, that's an older facility as well. Upgrading that facility, we get those pilot studies going on now, but to implement them is expensive. So to move forward with the system, we've removed any fluff in the 5-year plan. When we had those 15% increases, we scrubbed the list with utility staff and said, what is critical to maintain the system, to rehab the system? We don't want failures. We don't want to exceed DEP requirements. What's the minimum we can do in the 5 years that are must-haves? And that is all that is in here. There are no projects in here that, hey, if we don't build a home in the next 5 years, we're not going to need these. Yeah, there may be 1 or 2 wells potentially, but 95+%, we're going to have to do these whether building happens or not. We're at that point where this needs to move forward.
And Vice Mayor, if I can, I just want to give some, evidence. Mr. Hamilton mentioned that it's an enterprise system, right? So the money stays back in the utility. And in fact, we did have a cost savings whenever we refinanced our Series 2013 loan, and we saved the city $7.4 million. So that's great. That stayed back into the system and lowered that debt to interest ratio for that payment, right? So just wanted to try and give evidence to that we do look at those cost-saving measures for our long-term debt.
No, and I'm not questioning that, okay? And Helena does a fantastic job, by the way. But what I'm saying is that never translates into a reduction in the bill. It never does, because we always have costs, and things are always going up. And I do think that costs are going to go down, but they're not going to be pre-COVID levels, and we'll never see that again, in my opinion. And that's just historical. So that's my concern, is if we overshoot this, how does that come back into the residents' pockets? That's my concern. And it won't.
And I understand, and I 100% agree with you. I'm sorry, Councilmember Miller. But also, when we did the debt refinance, it was also during the time where we were facing extreme inflationary numbers from COVID, right? We refinanced in 2022, and then we're seeing a huge cost increase on chemicals and ongoing maintenance supplies. So you're right, it wasn't really felt by the ratepayers, but it was back into the original system.
And I can
I
add on to that just real quickly. You know, when we come for the second bond, you know, as Murray indicated, we go through a whole further step. You know, it almost takes it a step further than we have today. So if we come back with that second bond in 27 and say costs go down, things go down, when council approves that bond, they could say, hey, we only need a 5% increase instead of the 8% this year. They could adopt a new rate increase when that second bond is issued, if there's rate sufficiency for the bond.
You said the second bond?
The second bond. The first bond, we're at that point this October. Unless the market comes back and we get a 3% rate instead of what was allocated in there, we may be able to drop it slightly, but it's highly unlikely. It's really going to be that second bond where we have the timing to make an adjustment when we go to move forward with the second bond. And maybe construction costs drop way down. There's an unknowns. We're just taking it based on what we know, information we know today, and based on our best projections and working with our financial consultants.
What did you have, Councilman?
Yeah, so I was just going to add, Mr. Mayor, that, we could probably assume that inflation is reducing, but I wouldn't expect a huge drop in construction costs in general, so negative inflation. We saw this in the past where I think this first bullet was originally projected at around $80 million, and it was pushed down the road, and now it's 265. So if we're talking about cost savings, paying for it sooner than later or getting it started now when we can capture that cost before it grows, it is a service to the community. Because of that, I'd rather be paying some of this stuff now than asking in 4 years to raise rates again extremely.
Going back to November 2023, the price tag on all this, probably November 2020, the 14th of November. I remember that date specifically. So going until they increased the rate, the impact fee rates, to now, it has cost us an additional $20 million, correct? Because it was 220 at the time, and now it's up to, it was up to 240.
Yeah, there's been a few changes in the pricing. There's a couple reasons. One was the conversion of the plant costs. I don't think we're taking into account that those initial numbers for the expansion only, and we actually were able to, based on during the the analysis of the initial scoping of the project, we're able to add more MGD at that site than we originally had projected. So we're getting a bigger expansion. So the cost went up because of bigger expansion, cost went up, and we added the cost for the conversion into the mix. So that's why there's that's part of the reasons why there's those drastic increases in that plant one.
Okay. You're done, right, Murray?
Yes, sir.
Anything else from the dais?
What is stopping us from approving the first bond for 282 and calculating whatever that does to the rates, and then in 27 or 28 bringing it back and looking at it again? Is it because we have to show, because if we have to show the ability to pay back that first bond, then essentially it seems to me that would be affected, that would affect the rates, and whatever the rates end up being, that would support that bond. Why do we have to make a decision on both bonds now?
Some of those water projects are in the second bond because we're under design and permitting, and same with the wells, field expansion. So a lot of those water projects are spread over 5 years because they take time.
But you're not going for the second bond until 2027, you said, right?
Correct. So we'd be doing, with this first bond, I believe we're going to be doing some of the well field expansion. I think where we would do the first phase of a plant expansion, but then with the second bond, we'd be adding more wells raw water main, as well as the second phase of the expansion at the plant.
You want to have enough cash flow to construct the project so that
You're
you're
going to
not.
spread those monies over all of these, not, got it.
Right.
If I could try it another way, part of what I'm hearing, so the second bond issue is estimated to occur in fiscal year 2028. So, you know, again, it's still it's an 8% rate adjustment in order to maintain the cash flows during that period of time. And so, you know, if Carl doesn't do the second, or project the second segment of the capital maintenance and the other programs that he's doing, then I can't really count on the revenue to be there to continue to perpetually repay the current bonds. And so they do kind of go hand in hand. There's not a, can I run a scenario just for the bondholders on bond one? It's one connected system.
It's a lot of projections. Are you done, Vice Mayor? Are you good?
Mayor, can I just help the public just understand water and wastewater capacity really quick? So I think the community is aware that our wastewater is regulated by FDEP. And in the summer, in June 2024, whenever it was extremely dry, we had capacity at wastewater treatment plant 1, right? There was no rain that month. It was extremely dry. Well, in that very same month, our capacity for water was at 12 million gallons whenever we're regulated by the Water Management District at 14, which is our CUP, our consumptive use of, our CUP. Consumptive use permit. You got to remember, I'm not a utility professional. I've been getting head nods in the back there. So when Carl talked about we tripped the 80% capacity and that we're concerned, it's because per our regulatory agencies like DEP and St. John's, once you trip that, then you need to expand your water capacity. And so while a really dry month is great for wastewater, it's really bad for water. And if you all remember, we had some minerals in the water and some complaints from the residents. So this is a plan to try and address not only the wastewater capacity concerns, but also our water challenges. So try to give you a brief capacity analysis.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that, City Manager, and it's not that I don't recognize the importance of these projects. I do. But, you know, we have to weigh what it is that we're imposing on our current residents, because essentially our current residents, due to the exponential amount of growth very quickly, are having to pay for that growth. And I've said it from this seat, and I'll continue to say it from this seat. I am ardently against that. I think that growth should be paying for itself. Per your point, it really never does. So we're going to have to make up this somehow, right? But I see that in $265 million. I'm willing to say, let's go ahead and pay $265 million for part of this. But you don't have me there on all of it, because while I understand the importance of these projects, we have got to figure out a budget and a timeline of how we can make this more consumptive for more future residents. That's not my job, and I you know, but it is my job to guard, to help the taxpayers that we have and to make sure they don't get taxed to death. And I'm seeing $265 million as a big ask already. So we got to stop it somewhere. We can't just say, and I'm sure there are other projects, Carl, to your point. I know that you guys trim this down, and I don't want that to be overlooked. But I'm telling you, my position is that we need to trim this down even more and somehow determine what it is that we're going to pay for in this current rate increase and what is it that we're going to address in the future. Or are we going to rework the budget or continue to prioritize this in appropriations for the next few days to kind of make up for these, go after those grants, all of those things?
Yeah, right now, the projects in here, you know, so to change the 5-year CIP plan, you'd have to change the factors that led to the plan. We have, 2.9% growth, and 3% inflation. So if we want to remove projects, we'd have to reduce the growth rate to a different number, or we'd have to not account for certain inflation. Now, what this may have an impact would be if we do that, and then our R&R fund. So do we want to wait till it breaks to fix it, or do we want to be more proactive in our R&R fund? So we need direction from council on how proactive do we want to be on our capital R&R. And it could impact our bond rating because they look at the sufficiency of the system in terms of revenue and how we're upkeeping the system, and they look at multitude of factors. So it could have some repercussions that may not be favorable to the city. So we would need direction on what you would want us to factor in to make the changes to the capital plan.
Just to add to that, going back to the same point I made before, is that in the effort to reduce costs for the resident, by pushing these off, we're potentially increasing cost, because of the growth in costs that these will be when we have to do them under consent decree.
Okay, that's it. Councilman Miller? This is what I like to say on this subject, because I know it's tough. We're in a tough spot. I went back and I researched. We've had these issues going back for more than a decade, with what our water treatment system, the financing, the borrowing. It's gone on for more than a decade, and I feel it every month when I look at my water bill, because I never in my life that I think my water bill, or my city utility bill, I should say, will be higher than my electric bill. And right now in the winter, that's the way it is. And I'm sure from the what is it called? The baby boomers, they never thought they'd see that in their lifetime. But I do feel that we can't keep kicking the can down the road. We're in no better spot. We're in a worse spot than we were back in November of 23 when Mr. Flanagan presented that first study. But what I would like to talk about, and I've discussed it with the city manager, is to help those people on their monthly city utility bill. And different parts of the state do it a different way. Like I had a friend of mine down in Oakland Park send me his city utility bill and his tax bill. Their stormwater fees are a non-ad valorem assessment on their property tax. Same way with trash, it's on their property tax. It's not on their monthly bill. So there are ways, we just have to go through the process of shifting that weight over to unburden those people in that monthly bill as far as their city utility. Because sometimes it's a slap in the face. It's a high fee. So I would like to explore that. Me and the city manager have discussed that. As a matter of fact, down in Oakland Park, and I think Chief of Staff mentioned too, St. John's or somewhere, they have a fire fee that they have on there. And other cities have the utility fee. We don't have the utility fee, and we don't have the FP&L franchise fee. And I fight like hell to keep that from going on putting that burden on you guys. But we can't keep kicking the can down the road, And I know there's people that were sitting on this council just a few months ago that will say, see, I told you they were going to raise your... No. It's because the can's been kicked down the road for more than a decade. So we have to do what we have to do, but we can do the creative accounting by shifting some of that over to your property tax. But we have to do this. Now, if I go back and I say, well, impact fees have not kept up. We know that. Carl, you've said that regarding the fire impact fees. Fire impact fees have not kept up to pay for the fire station. You remember saying that a few months ago? And we have to be better at government. That's why you elected me. That's why you elected Councilman Miller, Councilman Stevens. You elected us for a change. And my number one priority on my platform when I was running was revitalizing our existing infrastructure. And we have to do it. We don't have a choice in it. Now we're under an FDEP consent decree. So we have to do it. So I'd just like everyone to understand our perspective and where we're coming from. And we're going to do the right thing by the community, but we can't keep kicking the can down the road. So with that, we want to open this up for public comments. So anyone that has a comment, please come forward. Please don't beat us up too much.
Hi, Maggie Fisher. My residence is One River Landing Way. My background was education. I started as a music teacher and I finished as a school superintendent in the state of New Jersey for the last half of my career. Had a lot of play that I had to do with bonding to fix things and how far could you go at one time. And I think a piece of what our vice mayor has just said is correct, that this list is the best that could possibly be done. But you know, in real life, we have to look at what we must do as opposed to what we'd like to do or nice to do, okay? I think that list has to be looked at again, and we have to be darn sure of how far we're going to go on the bonding. I don't like at all what these gentlemen have proposed in terms of 4 years in a row, 8% each year. You know, you've just been elected. I'd like you to stay on the council. I think this is a good group of people, but if you're going to be telling people in a couple of months that, you know, that get prepared for 8% increases over four years in a row or possibly 5, forget it. And I think their proposal is based solely on one thing, and that's the taxpayer. That's a big mistake, okay? I heard the mention of a $40 million proposal be submitted, and we only got $1 million out of that? I don't know who did the proposal, but that person shouldn't be around anymore. We need somebody who knows how to write grants in this area to be able to off-put those taxes from the taxpayers here in the city. There's got to be more emphasis, and you know, I can say this not knowing how many people like that are out there, but the city manager should be looking at it, other people should be looking at, we've got to look for grant writers. There have to be people who are excellent at this, and whatever their salaries are the investment in allowing our taxpayers to get released. That's one thing. Second thing, does anybody know whether the state of Florida has funds available to cities like us who are in a high financial stress situation? Right now, we're in that. We've been in it for 12 years, okay? I'm sure the state of Florida has some kind of funds. Maybe we have to start looking like we're in more of a stress in order to get these funds. And there's a whole theory about that on chaos theory. That if you know what's going to happen, if you're really in trouble, you might want to press the buttons to make it happen, okay? I mean, I had to do that. I did it. And the taxpayers were so happy, and it was the right thing because our kids deserved it. And here I know you're trying to do the right thing for taxpayers. So those are my 2 takeaways. And goodbye.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, that $40 million was our legislative ask. Correct, Carl?
Correct.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Anna Gibson, P section, so I just wanted to make some comments. So on the proposal, I see a rate increase, but we're still not justifying the impact fees. I mean, you presented that we're losing money on every single PEP tank that's installed. That's absolutely ridiculous. You need a line item that says every new PEP tank needs to pay for itself. You said you don't want the residents to pay for growth, prove it to them. The next thing I wanted to comment about was the sprinkler system, so I'm with you, Mayor Norris. First of all, you say, hey, it's reclaimed water, but guess what? We're paying the cost with the electricity, so every single time those sprinklers come on, we're still paying for it. And also, we're paying for it twice a day, those sprinklers to come on. Is that really necessary? So I think we need to look at those types of allocations and see how we can really save money. You say there's no fluff in this budget, but last week you just gave $1 million to the design contract for Old Kings. So there's clearly fluff in your budget that would have paid for almost that last line item, or at least, what, 1/4 of it down there. You would have paid for it if you just didn't give it away to a design contract for Old Kings. That could have been postponed, let's be honest. The other thing that I'm going to say, I'm sorry, I have a gripe with the city attorney. quite frankly, you're saying we don't have extenuating circumstances to improve our impact fees. There's no way you know that. Go do your research. Like, you have no idea that there's a case law or not a case law for it. So I think you need to go back, do your research, and really present whether that has been, anyone sued a city government for that. Nashville has actually lowered their utility rate because they've had such substantial growth in that area that they increased their impact fees so much they lowered their utility rate. So I think you really need to look at that case example because people here are on fixed incomes. They cannot afford to pay any increase in their utility fees. They really can't. They're barely surviving here. So that's kind of really what I want to comment on. And the other thing, these spillovers in the community, I have a small child. Why aren't I notified about that? Like, I want to know if my kid can't play in the puddles in our swells because there's spillover and sewage for some reason. Like, you notify us not to use our things during high capacity. When you're at high capacity, tell me when there's a spillover. That's really dangerous. Also, something to consider if you're in a neighborhood with PEP tanks, you should consider making people have an auto meter for them. There's a lot of snowbirds down here. They could pay an extra cost for the auto meter. How many times are you in a neighborhood, you hear a light going off and that sound, it's annoying, it's hazardsome to the neighborhood. You can auto do it so that you're automatically notified of a PEP tank issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Michael Flanagan, Grand Haven. First, thanks to everyone that's done this hard work and to the board that's asking really difficult questions, trying to get the answers. I was fortunate to be part of the Citizens Academy and learned a lot of things in the background, and I think they've done a great job in presenting it today, but at the same time, you're asking some really relevant questions. As you look at the list, one of the things I'm wondering that I didn't see, and I think that they're all really important, but what's the timeline and what's the layover of what the costs versus value? Can something be pushed out because we're not seeing the efficiencies of having the trades there at the same time? The only chart I didn't see was a risk analysis of what has to be done in what order, so that we can see if any of these things could possibly be laid over at a different time. The other part would be that, May, you were talking about better use of our land, not using sprinklers so much. What I'd ask is there's a lot of work with the communities and HOAs to change things over to native plants and more permeable hardscapes. This way we use the rainwater as opposed to have to irrigate. With the lack of being able to get the funds from the state or from other governments, there's a lot of us here that were in business for many years that are very much, invested in this community. And if we can help, put it on the website, ask people to volunteer, to work on the grants, to get involved, to make calls, to write letters and emails. If we don't know that you need us, sometimes we don't know to step up. And then I know that you hear a lot of things from businesses and consumers about the need to increase the utilities, but you've got a couple of really good public awareness areas. You've got emails, you've got newsletters, you've got the website, but there's nothing out there that I see on easily to find about what the utilities company or the utilities group is stressing on and why certain areas of the town aren't planned to be getting water or sewer fast. Please use those communication platforms so people know. And lastly, when you look at the rates, please reward the folks that are doing the conservation. I've changed everything in my house to low-volume toilets, better control of faucets. I irrigate only twice a week. So I'm doing everything I can to make sure that I'm not overburdening the systems. And when you're looking at the rates, please make sure that we get rewarded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Hey, Council. Dennis McDonald. Before we start, can I get the last, or one of the last slides you put up, Carl? Kind of like we liked your pie chart the last time. And so the one that had the increase for the last 5 years with everything shooting up to the far right. I think it was the third to the last in your why. Almost. One more. There you go. There you go. Okay. Okay. So, if I close my eyes, I think I'm back in 2011, sitting in the old rec building, listening to the same discussion. It's the same old, same old. Let's trim a little bit, make it look good for the voters, but let's figure out how we can borrow more money. That's exactly what's going on here. You got to start doing business very differently than what you're doing it, okay? And that's what we elected you for. So here's the thing. Number one, you should not be in the utility construction business. Developers are very capable of putting in their own sewer and water. I did it. It was required of any place that I ever developed in other states. Why you're doing it? I can tell you why. That number is why. Because we're financing that right now, okay? This money that you're laying out on the front side, you never get it back. And so get out of the construction utility business. Change how we do business overall. Take that chunk of the utility department away. You put an inspector on the job. He has to produce, or the developer has to produce an as-built when it's all done, and you accept it. That's how the utilities are put in other places. Next thing, PEP tanks. I thought we were the biggest city in the state that had the most PEP tanks. I was corrected tonight. We're the second, okay? So that's a colossal disaster, okay, when you look at how sewer systems are supposed to work. PEP tanks they take and they blow the effluent out to a main pumping station that everybody uses. Anybody with a PEP tank should be serviced by a completely separate entity set up by the city, okay, and be charged a fee for that so everybody else doesn't pay for it. And we're not paying for it in our bond issues. So those two things are major issues that you can save millions of dollars on doing immediately, and let's stop paying for the developers. That's what you're doing with that right up there right now, because you can't ever catch it. And you can't ever catch it in your increases with the state. You're already 5 to 7 years behind by the time you get to make an increase in your fees. Your point on water, on city water, was excellent, because consequently we're charged for the city water, but you also have the increase. You're also being charged for the water that you're watering your lawn with, okay? And it never goes down the sewer line. So there's so many things that we could do differently, completely differently, and I haven't heard one in this room tonight other than how we're going to push the bonds up, how we're going to be able to manage it with a new increase in interest rates. So first thing is, you need to stop constructing utilities in this town. Let the developers do it on their tab. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
So don't kill the messenger, but for some reason I volunteered to sit here and receive many of our residents' text, and they have some questions for clarification. The first one was, the residents believe they voted against a bond issue during the last election. That's misinformation. I know the bond was more of wording for our charter to clarify something. Tonight, we have heard bond, 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 bond. I'm getting exploded with people going, we voted against a bond. Information needs to get out and clarify to our residents that we're fortunate enough not to be in here. Secondly, the slides move too quickly for the people that are out at home on the YouTube channels watching it, and they're kind of fuzzy. Will all this information be available and clear on our website so that we can find them and look at them in preparation for the upcoming meetings? Because I have yet to find that great presentation that you put on utilities on our website that I've looked for at least 5 times. So the information that we need to inform our residents is failing. The other questions that they had was, I'm concerned about what Carl said about what is the 80% capacity limit And does that trigger the consent decree issues? Because I asked Carl a year ago if capacity of our water and sewer could be used as a limiting factor in controlling our growth. And I've discovered in looking at many other cities, here in Florida even, that they use that utility capacity as a guideline, a gateway to understand and control both the fees we charge builders and limiting on how fast our growth is. Don't know what the answer is there. And Mayor, 2003 Palm Coast buys water system. Google says it was for $442 million, if you believe that. So with that, thought I would just share with you all the people that are out watching it on YouTube and have a lot of questions. So thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. We'll try to answer those. Anyone else for public comment? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Nina Madiunas. I'm from the W section. And I'm a senior citizen, and my bill has gone up from $100 last year to $200. So I'm on a fixed budget. It's a little difficult to afford to pay this. It's like increasing the taxes by $2,000, if you want to look at it that way. And I was wondering if the taxes, as they are already, could absorb some of the increase that you're trying to have the taxpayer absorb. And so I don't understand it because I have actually turned off my water, thinking that maybe that would help with the expense. And I don't water the lawn. I'm a senior citizen on Social Security, and it's difficult. So I think there's a lot of people. I've been on I don't know if you look at Nextdoor. It's an app that is through, I don't know if it's through Facebook, it might be, but an awful lot of people, I had 104 comments about their utility bill being raised. Some of them it's gone up to almost $400 a month, which is crazy for water and for garbage and all those other fees. I understand that those things have to be added in, but a bill of maybe $145 a month would probably be something that most of those people would accept, but $200 and on upwards is just, inexcusable, I think, for people who've lived here for so many years and then all of a sudden have to be faced with this. So that's basically what I wanted to raise. And I have, let's see. I was wondering if you could just limit the number of development permits that are, to put a ceiling on the amount of people that can come into Palm Coast, which would prevent the need for such an expansion of the infrastructure. I don't know how that works, but I thought maybe we need to do that. And I also wanted to ask, when will these rate increases begin? And the other question was something I had already asked about the taxes, possibly absorbing some of that. And that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. If accepted as written, it would be effective in April. But I don't know if you have a copy of your utility bill with you, but I'd like to take a look at that or get a copy of it, because if you're a single person living along, my wife and I think ours is like $165, and we use almost 5,000 gallons. So if you could, Kaylee, if you could get a picture of her utility bill, I'd appreciate it.
Mayor, Ms. Asbill is in the back and is willing to help the resident with her bill.
All right, thank you. Anyone else for public comment?
Yeah, I'm not much of a public speaker, but I want to thank you
Just
for
state your name,
limiting the people.
Just state your name, sir.
Jeff James.
Yes, sir.
I'm Jeff James.
Yes, sir.
And I want to thank you for limiting the people, the developers that wanted to double the amount of homes that they could build on one tract of land. Everybody here knows that the traffic here is growing. And they say, well, we don't know which way the direction of the growth in Flagler County is going to happen, I can tell you. It's going to happen everywhere. There's not going to be a square lot around here in the next 10 years that's not going to have people living on it. So we don't want stinky neighborhoods. But also, when I moved here, I built a septic tank, and I've never had a problem with that tank for over 25 years. I've never spent a dime on it. But now I'm spending, I live in a different area. I live in Boulder Rock, over behind Home Depot.
Yes, sir.
My utility bill is about $150. It's gone up quite a bit. And it sounds like it's going to go up, you know, $25 a month or something here before it's all over. And why can't we all have a septic tank? And these people that want to build more properties in here, if they want to build more over here and you don't, we say, well, you can build 400 there, but they want to build 800. And then they want to sue us because we won't let them, you won't let them build 800 units. Well, look at the traffic. Look at our sewer system. We got to do something here to get back to ground zero with a septic tank, and we don't have to spend millions of dollars. That's my 2 cents. I didn't want to get up here, but
Thank you, sir.
thank everybody here that gave me a lesson tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for standing up.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else for public comment? Yes, sir, Mr. Fuller.
Good evening, Ed Fuller, Honorable Mayor Norris, Honorable Vice Mayor Teresa Carly Pontieri, Honorable City Councilman Ty Miller. First of all, I want to thank you. Leadership tackles problems. Leadership fixes problems. You can only do what you can do with the cards you've got and the hands that's been dealt to you. This consent order by the state is going to it's govern everything. You really don't have a choice. Nobody likes it. Nobody up here is wanting to do that. But anybody in the crowd can certainly identify when the government's knocking at your door and they're telling you, you have no choice, it's mandatory. And the city attorney, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's not an option. It truly is not an option. The other thing is when I would like to see when you do a utility presentation, why can't you slash and put public safety? That's public safety what you're doing. Who wants to have contaminated drinking water? Ask the people in Flint, Michigan, Jackson, Mississippi, Los Angeles, California. They didn't invest in their infrastructure. It's too late. I applaud you for what you're doing, but when it comes to public safety and drinking water and wastewater, that's non-negotiable. Can't do that. It is an economic development driver. And when the state does that, I like the anticipatory thing that, Carl, you did a great job. Thank you. I really learned a lot, again, as I did when I did the Citizens Academy. If we don't do this, we're going to end up in more consent decrees. It's plain and simple. Nobody wants to do it, but leadership says there's no option. There is no option to you all. Nobody likes it, but it's necessary. It's capital intensive. That is a business, and it's an enterprise fund. Talk about transparency. All the money that flows in there, everybody talks about, oh, they're doing this with that. That is a closed-end fund. You can see everything you're doing. And the other thing is the bonds. If we do not fund that adequately, our bond rating is going to go down. That'd be a fair statement to make? We don't want to incur another cost. That's just not, that's a non-negotiable as well. I want to thank you for taking this on. I want to thank you for fixing this thing, and that's going to move us forward. So thank everyone up here, and thank everybody in the audience for being very, very polite and very to the point. You've done a great job, and I want to wish everybody a happy Valentine's before I sit down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Anyone else for public comment? Yes, sir.
Good evening, Tony Amaral, Palm Coast. What we're doing here today is a matter, like you mentioned, it's a constant kicking the can down the road. I hear growth, building, and paying for its own infrastructure. In August of '23, because of another process, I asked for a request for information. And I pulled it up just recently. So in 2019, our fiscal year, the utility total budget was only spent 82.5% of it, which left a surplus of 7.9. In 2020, 71.2% of that budget was spent only, with a roughly $13 million. Also in 21 and in 22, roughly $19 million, with only 63.4% of its total utility budget being used. Those are numbers that were budgeted, and I'm assuming they're in reserves, so they're being used. It goes back to the process of growth paying for itself. The money that is being spent already when they've maximized the impact fee was money paid before and is being used tomorrow. So our money has value then too. The more we kick these projects down the road, the more we come here to the point where we have to say, it's not up for discussion, this is going to happen. We need to understand, if we stop construction today, fully, wholly, without any doubts, above all the other problems it would cause, that bond is going to go up because you have no more income coming in through impact fees. So yes, construction will not pay the full amount, but I thought I saw roughly 30% of it was just in R&R, which is not covered or allowed to be used by state law in impact fees. So build it. There's always going to be maintenance. There's always going to be fees. The cost pays for itself as it's supposed to, just like it is an enterprise fund, money in, money out. But we've gone years of kicking the can down the road where we had the 7.8 million to cover a couple of those projects. We had the 13 million, the 13 million, the 19 million. So we've paid for them, they're there. We're just losing out by waiting and waiting and waiting to do the process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else for public comment? Seeing no one come forward, I'll come back to the dais. Any other comments? I would like to say one thing to start off with real quick. When we're talking about our city utilities, we are required to service housing units in our city boundaries. So all this work we're even talking about, we still got 20,000 acres out on the west side that don't have homes on it right now. But we are still required to be able to service that area. Just a point of clarity on that. You got something, Vice Mayor?
I do. So the total project costs that we're looking at for the critical projects is $415 million. I'm suggesting we pay 265 of that. I don't consider this kicking a can, and I'm open to maybe doing wastewater treatment plant 3 expansion with that and doing $315 million of that. I'm not suggesting that we kick cans down the road. What I am suggesting, however, is so we budgeted a grant writer, okay? We know we're asking for more appropriations. There's been a whole committee in Tallahassee created by the legislature to look at projects again that were specifically water projects that were vetoed because I think our state has realized, oopsie, we probably shouldn't have vetoed all those water projects because we're not the only city having this issue. So they're re-looking at those things. What I'm suggesting is we dig in and we find other ways to get this money rather than saying, well, we've got $415 million worth of projects, let's just raise the rates on the taxpayer. I don't want to kick cans down the road, but I do want to say, let's make the people that are in positions to do these jobs, get grants, lobby in Tallahassee, do their job. I know that we cannot expect a whole lot of money from Tallahassee this year out of appropriations. Everybody under the sun is told that. Our Senate representative has told us that. Our House rep has told us that. We've heard that from the top down. But I think that paying for all of these right now with bonds, hundreds of millions of dollars in bonds, is not a step that we should take. We need to scale it back and find a spot more in the middle here, reconsider this total package, just reconsider it, and look at what that rate would look like for our taxpayers. That's all I'm asking. And even if we even look at this list, which I don't know if you can put it up again on slide 41, the last 5 items, 2.6 million, 4.2 million, 4.6 million, 5.5 million, and 8.2 million. Those are smaller dollar amounts that we can continue to go and ask for appropriations for. Those are smaller dollar amounts that we can possibly get grants for. Even if we get a 50% grant and have to match, these are still monies that I think we can find them. So all I'm asking is that council consider that staff maybe work with our consultant at what else this can look like, other than let's just throw it all in there and tax our rate user, our residents. So that's my plea to council and to staff.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilman Miller?
Yes, Mayor. So, just to push back a little bit on this, I went back and watched the rate discussions from last year, and it was very similar conversations. We should wait, we should go for appropriations, we'll get that money hopefully, and then we can work on it later. The end result was, in a year when we received record number appropriations, we received little to no money for water. And so, while it's, the intent is not to kick it down the road, because there's an altruistic approach to say, hey, maybe we can save the residents money, functionally it's still kicking it down the road because we're not getting the job done. And so my position would be that, it's going to cost us money either way, and it's going to cost us money later if we do it later than sooner. And so I'd rather just rip the Band-Aid off and fix the system. And that's what I ran on. I obviously did not run on raising your rates and, putting more bills towards you, but we can't continue to operate where our water systems are not doing what you deserve, right? There's complaints about quality of water. Every time it rains, we have issues with wastewater. We have to fix this system.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about the appropriations, but I think we also got an $80 million road. So I think that's a different scenario. I think this council has made the right call in prioritizing water and stormwater, and I know we have to discuss that a little bit later tonight as well. So I'm just asking for another reconsideration, because look, one of the other things that we did last year when we looked at the rates too was different scenarios. Right now, we've only looked at different scenarios of what are the different bonds we can get and how we can take out the debt and treat the debt differently. We haven't looked at different scenarios to say, if we choose these projects and not these, what does that look like? Because I think that the rates are going to go up either way. So, that's all I'm asking, is that we look at what does it look like if we even deduct $100 million in projects or $50 million in projects? What does that look like? If it results in only a $2 reduction, then the cost benefit is not there. But if we can cut the rate increase in half by a certain deduction of these things, then I think we owe it to ourselves and to our residents to do that analysis and to dig just a little bit deeper, rather than seeing this first presentation and saying, okay, let's do it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Murray?
Yes, sir.
All these items that are on this list, what's the total? Because I don't want to be on my phone.
The total is 413 million, so real close to what the Vice Mayor had calculated herself, of the 701 million of the total program. So this represents only 60% of the overall plan.
And these are not the only critical projects. We just listed some of the major ones here to try and identify them high level.
So this first bond, the 2026 bond, how much is that bond going to be for in scenario 3? Again?
282, I think.
It's 282.
I try to memorize every number, but it's tough, Mr. Mayor. Give me just a second.
Vice Mayor says 282.
It's on the slide 14, it's 284 million, Mr. Mayor.
You were close. Okay.
No cigar.
She said math isn't her strong suit.
$2 million, no. $2 million is a lot of money to me, because I came from a poor background. So, to me, I'd say we push forward with the option 3, as you suggested, Murray. And we, down the road, when it comes to 2028 for the second bond, right? Economic conditions are going to change in the next 2 years. We're going to have a lot of change going on. And we don't know what's going to happen with the legislature. You know, we can have our hopes high. And we've also, Councilman Gambaro reached out to Senator Scott's office, and one of his aides came down, or assistants came down and toured Water Treatment Plant 1. So things can change, but I'm telling you, I went back and I looked at the articles dating back to 2009. We're having the exact same discussions we're having now. We had Mr. McDonald standing up, talking about, borrowing against the utilities. Greg Hansen, a city commissioner, was talking about the same issues. So I think we should push forward, and we'll be reconsidering this next week. Is it next week?
No, Mayor, your current target is, it would be on for first
March-
reading on
March
March 4th.
March
Yes, sir.
4th. So we have some time to digest it, and I guess all we need is consensus to move forward.
You need
Council?
you need direction to city manager and
Okay.
staff.
So, Mr. Mayor, also, I was just going to mention, to your point, we can plan for success without help, but if we receive that help, we have the opportunity to reduce those rates in the future. And I know, the premise is that government never lowers taxes. We actually, Palm Coast has several times recently. But
The property tax, we've done rollback.
yes, correct.
Rollback, yeah.
No, I understand. And so myself, the mayor, and Councilman Stevens, we'll be here to discuss that in a couple of years. So if it does go back, hold us to what we're saying right now, that we will reduce it if we receive those appropriations, those grants to reduce the cost.
And I will say this, Vice Mayor, and everyone else in the public, I do think that, to ease the burden on baby boomers and retirees, that we can look at that. And there's nothing that stops us from shifting like trash and stormwater to non-ad valorem assessment on the property tax. That right there, that's $60, $60, $70, maybe $80 right there that's being taken off your water bill in just accounting and putting it on your property tax instead of your monthly charge. People on fixed incomes will feel that effect. Quite personally, I think so. And I don't see any north and souths out there, but you have time to digest it. And as for right now, I would say let's move forward as planned with what we got here. And we'll be looking at it again on the first read. Is that fair enough?
Mayor, I understand the direction is staff is going to have the ordinance drafted as scenario number 3 for first reading.
Yes, ma'am. Are we good? We're in agreement? I know it's hard, Teresa. I know.
We don't want to do this.
Okay, that's it for that item. Let's move on to the second presentation. And what time, we have to adjourn by 11 o'clock, Marcus?
Yes, sir.
Can we take like a 10-minute break? Anybody up for a 10-minute break? All right, we'll adjourn for 10 minutes.